Okay, the time is 3 o'clock. I'll just get confirmation that we have gone live. We are good. Thank you very much. So I will call the Tuesday, May 24th, 2022 regular council meeting to order. And we welcome Councillor Kelly virtually. So welcome. City Council has been doing Indigenous training, diversity and inclusion training, and since we have completed, I think, most of our training, we are now going to begin with Treaty 6 opening. So the City of Fort Saskatchewan is located within Treaty 6 territory and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4, the ancestral and territorial nation of the Nihawak, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis. We acknowledge the many First Nations Métis and Inuit peoples whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. It is because of these treaty relationships that we can live, work, and play on Treaty 6 territory. So we're very proud that at the opening of each of our meetings from here on, we will be beginning with this acknowledgement. So with that, the first item of business is approval of the May 10th, 2022 regular council meeting minutes. Councillor Macon.
I'll make the motion that we approve the minutes of the May 10th, 2022 regular council meeting as presented.
Thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? Not seeing any, I'll close the motion. Please cast your vote.
I'm sorry, Your Worship. Just need a vote from Councillor Kelly.
Is yours working, Councillor Kelly? Okay, so he voted in favor. Thank you. All right, that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We have no delegations that have pre-registered, so we will go straight into presentation from the Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association regarding the designated industrial zone update. So we welcome Mark Plamondon, Executive Director, Kendra Daw, Manager of Government Relations, and we also have our own Mark Morrissey joining from Economic Development. So welcome, and I'll just remind you that when you're speaking, the camera for you guys is up there, so just so that you can go back and look at yourselves after. And we do have 15 minutes set up for this.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mayor Catcher. Good afternoon, Council. Thank you for your time here this afternoon.
So, thank you, Your Worship and members of Council. My name is Mark Morrissey. I'm the Director of Economic Development here at the City, and it's my pleasure tonight to introduce you to Mark Plamondon and Kendra Daw with Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association, who will be providing Council with information regarding the designated industrial zone project that is ongoing. So the DIZ, as it's been called, is a partnership between the province, Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association, industry, and of course the membership of AIHA, of which the city is one. And it establishes a regulatory framework. It's really a best-in-class and framework in terms of regulatory processes and approvals for large-scale projects within this region. It does provide the city and the region with a very significant competitive advantage in that it does provide certainty to investors when it comes to their regulatory and their permitting processes. We don't anticipate too much in the way of impacts to the city with regards to our policies, bylaws, and other regulatory documents. However, if this process does require changes, those would be brought forward to Council at a later date. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kendra and Mark to provide more information.
Thank you very much, Mark. So, good afternoon. So Kendra and I here will be walking through a few slides to present to you and talk to you about the designated industrial zone pilot project. As referenced by Mr. Morrissey, this pilot project, how it basically started was over a number of years, we as Alberta's Industrial Heartland and others have recognized that the time it takes to get approvals of large-scale heavy industrial projects, it's becoming uncompetitive with other jurisdictions, and we had advocated to the government over a period of years that streamlining this process to speed up the time it takes to get regulatory approval would enhance the competitiveness of this region. And so this became a platform commitment of the UCP government back in 2018 to designate at that time what they were calling pre-approved industrial zones. It's since changed its name to designated industrial zones. And then this rolled into the government of Alberta's, their ministerial priority for the Alberta Environment and Parks, as well as municipal affairs. And then Alberta Environment and Parks basically started this pilot project back in April of 2020. And this lines up perfectly with the red tape reduction initiatives and other regulatory transformation initiatives identified by the government of Alberta. So the idea of the designated industrial zone pilot is to utilize existing and new government priority initiatives to support industrial developments, including modernizing processes, providing clear expectations, increasing efficiencies for industry and regulators. In essence, we're trying to increase and streamline the regulatory process so we shorten the time frame in which these can get done. That improves competitiveness for our regulatory and our overall regime, and that ultimately will help to attract new business, create jobs for Albertans, provide certainty and competitive advantage to industry, and be seen as best practice here for managing and encouraging sustainable growth.
As Mark mentioned, the intention here is to really streamline the regulatory environment. Through this, the government of Alberta has identified that under the current or previous state, under their regulatory assurance framework, the majority of the emphasis was being placed on the review and decision phase for new applications to the province. From this, we've recognized that there is ample opportunity for streamlining of, and as a result, increasing competitive advantage by changing that emphasis more to the discovery phase. So having greater conversations with applicants upfront that creates increased and more efficient decision-making process for the applicants, and therefore setting them up for success. While streamlining this framework, it also maintains regulatory and environmental performance. As we move through this project, the various initiatives have been really possible because we're seeing a cohesion between a number of different groups, not only the provincial government, but also our member municipalities of the 5 member municipalities of Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association, as well as we're seeing industry provide feedback so that we are really emphasizing that discovery phase and finding the greatest possible efficiencies for streamlining the process. Part of this has been a number of different implementation pieces. Government of Alberta is leading the way with significant and meaningful feedback from our member municipalities. Specifically, we have approximately 9 pieces of policy work that we're advancing, including streamlining the Environmental Protection Enhancement Act renewal process, an operational policy that supports that renewal process and cutting the timeline down from approximately 18 months to 6 months, as well as an applicant advisory service that will help walk new applicants through the actual application process. All of the different pieces that are being put forward through this, the various working groups have incorporated feedback from our member municipalities, including Fort Saskatchewan, which has been incredibly instrumental and very helpful and critical along the way to make sure that we're hitting the mark with these pieces. Of this work specifically, we have designed the criteria for designing or defining a designated industrial zone, and then from there we'll next be developing a DIS directive, which the intent here is to help shift from a pilot program to more of a maintenance type of program. Which again, Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association, working to ensure the continual representation of our 5 member municipalities, will be quite involved with. So of the DIS criteria, this particular piece is publicly available on the GOA DIS website. We have been quite critical of this piece as we've moved forward to ensure that our member municipalities meet this criteria. A number of these pieces come from the actual existence of Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association and the initiatives that we undertake here.
So just before you jump into what the policy is, Kenner, so ultimately here, what this pilot that and all of these initiatives that have been identified within the government of Alberta Environment and Parks in collaboration with ourselves and NCIA, right now you're currently sitting around, if a new large-scale project is looking at building a project in the industrial heartland, it could be in the order of 24 months to go through all the regulatory steps. And what they're trying to get that down to, or the target to get that down to, is 12 months or less. If it's just renewals, we're talking 6 months. We're currently 18, try to get that down to 6. But for new facilities, really want to get that down to less than 12 months so we can be competitive with other jurisdictions for the timeline that it takes. So that's really the story here, is the processes that are in place today, how can they be done differently with the regulatory the regulatory oversight that we currently have. So there's no sacrifice to regulatory oversight. It is simply streamlining how the applications and the processes that are done so that we can go from a 24-month time frame for regulatory approval down to 12 months. That's the intent of the designated industrial zone pilot.
Thank you. From here then, because as we know, political targets shift, we want to make sure that from a municipal standpoint, the designated industrial zone project continues to advance and strengthen and helps set the priorities for Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association for moving forward. As such, we've designed a policy. So within we have the Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association Designated Industrial Zone Policy. So this policy outlines the purpose, policy, as well as guiding principles that really anchor all of our member municipalities to that shared commitment of operating as a designated industrial zone, while also aligning with the Government of Alberta DIS criteria. So the policy is designed for longevity and continual improvement, and then from within that piece, then we have nested within it will be a number of schedules, which are the second row of items that we're seeing here. And these pieces that, as Mr. Morrissey said, should they require any kind of changes of procedures or policies or bylaws within the municipal level, would be brought forward to council to have support, and that all kind of decision-making autonomy maintains with the individual municipalities. So within the policy, really the intention here is, again, those threefold items of modernizing process, looking to really improve regulatory performance, and streamlining between municipal and provincial, as well as industry partners. Provide clear expectations, again, looking to place greater emphasis on that discovery phase upfront, so that way then applicants are very clear on what is expected for their applications, what is complete at the time of submission, and finally also increasing efficiencies and that competitive advantage by removing duplication and redundancies in applications, creating that streamlined understanding of the expectations, and then also creating that alignment between between Government of Alberta's DIS directive and the operational policies that are mutually beneficial and support economic development within the heartland. One piece I would like to emphasize here as well within the policy is that, again, the policy is not legally binding, meaning that it continues to recognize the independent discretion of each of the municipalities. So again, this is about the intention of anchoring all of our member municipalities to the concept of a designated industrial zone and continuing towards continual improvement to help really streamline processes and leverage that competitive advantage this region has. Lastly, I'd just like to point out a couple of the policy details here. Really what we're looking for is the opportunities for alignment that results in increased predictability of the processes and emphasizes that discovery phase. Again, emphasis on the alignment with Alberta Environment and Parks policies and directives that further that support that discovery phase, again with the incredible feedback that we've received from all of our member municipalities, including folks from the City of Fort Saskatchewan. It'll result in increased clarity and consistency between jurisdictions and streamline the processes, resulting in strengthened competitive advantage. And finally, that continual improvement piece of looking for opportunities of creating that alignment and providing upfront information that helps new applicants move forward with decisions to build in the region. And finally, I'd like to say that it will result in supporting efficiency between our jurisdictions while respecting that autonomy of our municipalities.
So for next steps with this initiative, at the next AIHA board meeting, we'll be seeking approval for the policy from Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association board, and then that would position each of the municipalities as they're working through their administrative processes. Any modifications that are needed, that can happen really within the processes of each municipality as required. But the intent here for us today is to socialize this policy with you so you have a better understanding of what's happening at the Government of Alberta level with respect to the Designated Industrial Zone pilot initiative. And then as administration brings forward its respective changes to its processes internally as needed to align with this policy, you'll know where that direction is coming from. And that is all we had today. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you very much for that presentation. I'll open it up to questions. Councillor Harris, you're first.
So is the policy aimed at ultimately creating a better competitive climate against the Gulf Coast states? Because we're not too concerned about other Canadian jurisdictions, I would imagine. Is that the primary driver?
Yeah, absolutely right. So the initiative in the first place of having a designated industrial zone or streamlined regulatory environment here in the industrial heartland is exactly right, because we're not competitive from a duration, how long it takes for the regulatory approval process here relative to other jurisdictions. And so the main point is, how can we be more competitive compared to Gulf Coast? They're the benchmark, so certainly that was the main driver here.
Yeah, so within the context of being competitive, do they have the same environmental standards that we have to adhere to? Because, I mean, that would obviously appear to me to be something that maybe is not on an equal footing.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, there's specific details there. It'll depend on what exact criteria we're talking about. There are some areas where the Gulf Coast standards are probably more stringent than here in some cases, and then vice versa, some cases we're more stringent here. This is not so much about stringent in terms of emissions limits or anything like that. This is more around how can you get through the regulatory process in a more accelerated fashion to give certainty to investment.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Macon.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation today, guys. Just a couple questions. So when you talk about getting it down to 12 months or less, is that the average time for those competitive jurisdictions?
So the answer there is it depends. So it'll depend on the project and how much upfront work they've done in their engineering study. So it's hard to give the exact number, but the anecdotal evidence that we have in conversations with investors that look at various jurisdictions was that or less is a good competitive number. But where we're at today is simply too long. But it's hard to say exactly because it will depend on the project, the amount of engineering work done, all those things. So
that's fair.
Yeah.
So just a curiosity, do these jurisdictions that we're competing with, do they have designated industrial parcels, or are they simply better at getting the regulatory work done faster?
Well, it's different. It's different. Let's put it that way. So there is some, some policies that the government of Alberta looked at Gulf Coast and used that as a benchmark to model against, etc. How we do things here a little bit differently. The point of dedicating a specific jurisdiction like Alberta's Industrial Heartland is it's already recognized that there's enough or significant amount of upfront work done in terms of modeling, science, environmental studies that provides a baseline of information and a recognition in this area that then positions you to do things in a much more streamlined fashion. So there would be areas in Gulf Coast that would be like that, and then again, it's a fairly large jurisdiction, so not everything would be that way. But there was some benchmarking done there for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Batoye.
Thank you for your presentation, guys. I think this is really important work you're doing. As we mentioned, it's important that we provide certainty to potential investors as we compete for those businesses to come here. My first question, and first of all, I'd like to say that I really liked seeing Indigenous support as, part of your new future, let me get the right word here, future state. I liked seeing that. But my question is, just based on the Back to the Future states, talking about the new projects will take 12 months, but it says pending need for environmental impact assessment. So generally speaking, how I believe that most of these projects actually require an EIA. So does that then increase the time from 12 months to, or?
If I may. So the Designated Industrial Zone Pilot Project and Initiative was a provincial government initiative and then working with the Industrial Heartland and with the NCIA members, so a municipal and provincial initiative. At this time, and way back a few years ago when we were looking at this, we talked about, can we fold the federal environmental impact assessment process into this? The challenge with that is that adds a whole additional layer of complexity, and so the strategy or the idea was, let's get this done at the municipal provincial level, which we have more input into, and then get that up and running, and then see where we fold the Canadian, if possible. So that's not even for sure if it's possible to do that. So that refers to if there is a Canadian environmental impact assessment needed from the Government of Canada, that could potentially change those timelines because those are outside of the control of the provincial regulator. And no, it's not. I would say most projects, depending on the project, would not need a Government of Canada environmental impact assessment. It depends on the project. It depends if it's multi-jurisdictional. So pipelines across many jurisdictions would need that, but an isolated project that is on a specific heavy industrial plot of land likely would not. Okay.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. And just my second question. I was recently at a meeting with, and someone from Invest Alberta came to do a presentation and talked about how lots of companies, when they're making investment decisions, are looking through the lens of ESG, right? And that's not something I really saw in this initiative. And while I understand that AIHA might have some other initiatives that cover stuff like this, but we should be looking at it from a holistic perspective. So just wanted you to comment on that.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So this initiative is with respect to the environmental regulatory process. So the E in ESG is environment. So this fits in perfectly with the ESG lens that companies are looking for. So, but I do want to clarify that this isn't so much about the regulatory stringency or anything like that. This is about streamlining the processes that are currently in place and improving those processes. So to your question around companies look at investments through an ESG lens, the Industrial Heartland is so well positioned given access to already, I'm going to say, low carbon feedstocks and then the access to carbon capture and storage capability that positions this region so well for industrial decarbonization and leading the world really with respect to low carbon industrial projects and products. So we're very well positioned. This initiative, we think, is about improving, streamlining the process to be more competitive within the overall framework that we're in. So it fits quite nicely, improving the competitiveness within the ESG framework that companies will look at here. Definitely.
Excellent. Well, I support the initiative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Anoyan.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I'd echo Councillor Abatoya's sentiments. This is a great initiative, and I'm sure it'll be well received by business looking to move into the heartland. My question just maybe is an elaboration of Councillor Abatoya's first question, which is, are there any potential other federal influence on this policy advancement that could be a hurdle in implementation that we're aware of?
Thank you for the question. So the processes that are being discussed here and streamlined are all within the provincial jurisdiction. So simple answer is no with respect to everything that's being assessed and reviewed. It's all within provincial jurisdiction for the processes that are in place with Alberta Environment and Parks and within the municipalities as well. If a project or company is looking at building a project here that requires an environmental impact assessment at the Government of Canada level, then that would be completely different and is outside the jurisdiction of the Alberta Environment and Parks.
Right. So EIA would be the only.
It's one. I don't want to say it's the only. It's one.
It's the biggest, yeah.
I mean, there's other federal areas of jurisdiction, like Departments of Fisheries and Oceans, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's another area where. Right, outside of anything outside of provincial jurisdiction is not part of this process.
Right. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Blizzard. You can watch it live right here. Okay. He had a phone come on. He was watching it on. It's okay. Councillor Blizzard, you're next.
Thanks for your presentation. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say, thanks for doing this. I'm glad the province is doing this, and anything that can lower the timeline, I get it that companies are going to be hesitant if it's going to take 2 years, 3 years, who knows. So I think it's a good thing to do. Okay.
Thank you. I do have one question for you. Now, it is provincially government started, but Heartland's been part of this right from the beginning, pushing this. So I guess the question that I have is, are they yet to agree to put it into legislation, or is it going to strictly be policy? And if it's strictly policy, what's the longevity on it or the predictability for the future?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Mayor Catcher. So, as we've discussed at Industrial Heartland board meetings, and the legislative changes here that could be enacted were not going to meet the or be part of the legislative agenda going into the fall here, given some of the turmoil, if I can use the word turmoil, but some of the uncertainties at the provincial government level now. I'd say that the likelihood of that happening in the near term is probably fairly low. So what we're looking at is the policy streamlining and the operational streamlining that's happened within Alberta Environment and Parks for this whole process. And then there's the whole digital regulatory assurance system that they've put in place. And so there's lots of activities that happen at the Government of Alberta. I think what would give us, comfort, regardless of what's happening at the political level, is that these improvements and the streamlining that's happening just make good sense even from a government administrative standpoint. So it just makes sense that now that you've streamlined these processes, that those would continue to be streamlined. It's not as obviously as firm as if you have a designated industrial zone act that then requires legislative changes to override that. But I think the improvements would be recognized by really any party that's in charge, any government that's in charge, recognize that these just make sense from a streamlining and a government efficiency standpoint, and would stand up in any event.
Great. Thank you very much. And as everybody has indicated, thank you for all the work that you've been doing on this. I mean, to have a vision of the heartland and everything that can happen within this region just continues for the wealth and prosperity of this region and our citizens and the businesses. So thank you for continuing to do this. And thank you for the presentation. That appears to be all the questions. And we will not hold you hostage. You may leave once you finish.
Thanks. Thank you very much for your time today.
Mr. Morrissey, you're staying. Thank you. Just give him a second. All right, the next item on the agenda is a public hearing, and this is for bylaw C15-22 for the Brownfield tax exemption. And as always, I give just a little overview how public hearing works for those who haven't tuned in before or listened. So the process will be, once I open the public hearing, administration will do a presentation. Council will be allowed to ask any clarifying questions, not get into debate, just clarifying questions. Following that, if anybody wishes to speak in favor or opposed, they would be able to do so after that. Following that, administration comes back, answers any final questions. I close the public hearing and we go to business arising from the public hearing. So with that, that's the process that is followed. So I will open the public hearing at 3:31 and welcome Mr. Morrissey to present.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. Once again, my name is Mark Morrissey. I'm the Director of Economic Development here at the City, and it's my pleasure to present Bylaw C1522 for public hearing and subsequent readings. So just a little history and background. In July of 2021, Council adopted the Downtown Action Plan, which contained 23 recommendations to enhance and activate downtown Fort Saskatchewan. 2 of these recommendations included the establishment of an improvement zone in the downtown for the purposes of establishing business development and residential development incentives for both redevelopment as well as development. Following the adoption of the action plan, Council passed a motion in August of 2021 directing administration to provide a report that outlined options for the provision of incentives to encourage downtown redevelopment to include affordable housing and residential development, which was delivered in December of 2021. Following from there, administration engaged the legal services to draft a bylaw and policy to achieve the outcomes that were desired. First reading, of course, was given April of this year. Of course, the Municipal Government Act requires a public hearing prior to second and third reading of a Brownfield tax incentive bylaw, and that's presented here this evening. So during first reading, Council had some inquiries regarding how additional properties could be included as eligible. In consultation with Brownlee LLP, our legal services, they indicated that when you look at the 3 criteria there, possibly or is contaminated, vacant, derelict, or underutilized, and suitable for redevelopment or development itself, Council is ultimately the decision-making body. In fact, a direct quote from the Municipal Government Act says that in the opinion of the Council making the bylaw, so it really is up to Council. Now, further consultation with Brownlee indicated that you really need a reasonable basis for determining these criteria. In terms of vacant, derelict, or underutilized, or suitable for redevelopment and development, these are very subjective criteria and a very broad interpretation can be taken. The real linchpin there is possibly contaminated or is considered to be contaminated. And again, this is the reason that administration is proposing the 10 properties that we are, because based on past use, there is reasonable basis to conclude that these properties are potentially contaminated, even though there's no evidence to determine that there is. Additional properties could be added to the bylaw, again at the discretion of Council, and the reasonable basis that could be used to include them would be a Phase 1 or Phase 2 environmental assessment, at which point Council could add or amend the bylaw to include additional properties. So again, it does bear repeating the definition of contaminated or possibly contaminated. Again, it does not mean that any of the sites identified in the bylaw are contaminated. Just based on past use, the sites could be possibly contaminated. Again, these are former service stations, fuel stations, laundromats, where contaminants may be present and could be in the soil itself. There is no requirement to verify the presence of contaminants to be determined eligible. And again, Council does have the authority, or the ultimate authority, to determine if a property meets those eligibility criteria or not. So again, in consultation with Brownlee, there were a number of amendments that were proposed, including the two that are on the screen here. Adding these sections will increase or reduce the risk to the city itself. So again, not section 3.1 B dash or .vi. This is again is to just allow for a greater or for a little more certainty so that properties cannot qualify for both the Brownfield tax exemption, which we're talking about now, or the proposed development grants that we're going to be talking about later this evening. So again, it's either or, it's not both. And then again, just the addition of section 6.3, which does allow the city to seek the services of an audit or an external accounting agency or other organization with the review of the documents that are provided as part of the application process. And again, it serves two purposes. One as a deterrent and as a safeguard to ensure that the reporting and the documentation that the city is receiving is accurate and it does ensure compliance with what we've passed. In the review of the final review of the bylaw, there were a number of minor text amendments that were recommended to improve clarity and certainty, and these are included in motion number 2 of the report. And I don't think I need to get into them here, but I'm happy to answer questions if council has them later. Also, during first reading, there were 3 potential amendments that were proposed: extend the eligible taxation years from 10 to 15. Expand the eligible capital costs to include those costs related to site remediation, and incorporate an annual review so that council can evaluate the program and its uptake. Administration is supportive of these proposed amendments as they will increase the value of the program to applicants and potentially increase uptake. We'll also provide council and administration with the ability to review the program on a regular basis, including uptake and outcomes, and we can adjust as necessary. The only potential issue that was identified was in incorporating remediation costs. It could significantly increase the total amount of tax exemption. So we are recommending that a limit of $2 million be placed on the amount of remediation costs that could be considered as eligible, as this will reduce the risk. And the recommended motions to incorporate these proposed amendments are included in the report as motions 3, 4, and 5. So again, looking at the modeling, which we talked about during first reading, a capital costs of $14 million, which would be not an insignificant multifamily development, with remediation costs of $2 million for a total eligible capital cost of $16 million. 5% of that, as proposed, of course, would be $800,000 in tax exemptions, and which would, based on an annual tax levy of around $77,000. We would anticipate that that property would be exempted from property taxes for a period of 11 years. And again, if you factor in a construction period of anywhere from 18 to 24 months, that would still be within the 15 years being proposed. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. We will go into questions. I'll go first since there's nobody on there. So within your amendments that you have, taking it from 10 to 15 years, does that mean anybody who applies would automatically get 15 years? So if they came out of the gate tomorrow and said, well, I'm doing it tomorrow, and then do they get 15 years of tax exemption?
Through your worship, no. They would get whichever limit they achieve first, whether it be the 15-year time frame or the total tax exemption of 5% of capital.
Okay, and the time frame includes construction? Just explain that part. I'm
Sure.
still struggling with that part again on the time frames.
Sure. So typically speaking, the city does not assess and tax during construction. I know that we don't for industrial properties. Residential may get treated a little bit differently. Mr. Fleming can probably step in on that one. However, in terms of construction periods, if they said they were moving forward tomorrow and took 2 years to construct, there would be no tax uplift within that 2-year period. So there would be no exemptions to grant. The exemptions would kick in once that project is complete and occupancy has been granted. So at that point, that's when the clock would start. Based on what we've seen, and I can back up to the modeling, with a total eligible capital cost of $16 million, the total tax exemptions would only be $800,000. So once the accumulated total of tax exemptions reaches that level, then it's done. So they would actually hit that within 11 years. as opposed to
Okay.
the full 15. The 15-year time limit there is nothing beyond 15 years, no matter where you are in that process.
Okay. And I guess I'm going to come back to the same thing, pushing on that one. And why did we decide just to arbitrarily change it from 10 years to 15?
Through to your worship, that was proposed by council during first reading.
Okay, I think it was a suggestion, but I'll leave it with that, and we'll get into debate once we come out of that. Councillor Noyen, you're first.
Yeah, I would just like to ask about the properties in question, the 10 properties. And I'm not sure if anything changed since this came before council the first time, but are there any, or do we know how many that currently do not meet the requirements for being in good standing to apply for this?
Through your worship to Councillor Noyen, nothing has changed since first reading. There are still, based on past use, there are still only 10 properties in the downtown that would be considered eligible as a brownfield property. We would not determine the eligibility of those 10 until an application was made, and then we would look into all of the different criteria that are included in the bylaw, including are they in good standing with the city, is what they're proposing aligned with development regulations. So we would look into it at that point, and if during that review process or during the exemption period, if we determined that they were no longer in compliance, then we would act at that point.
Right, okay. And then my second question is just for the transferability of the tax exemption. So, for instance, if a property goes under foreclosure during construction and they have applied and received a tax exemption, is that transferable? A new application will have to be started and be in compliance without any stop work orders and proper development permits. But is there any benefit to having a transferable approved application for this program?
Your worship, to the Councillor Noyen, that was a question we did pose to Brownlee, and the answer is it's up to us.
Okay.
We can transfer the exemptions to a new owner if we so choose, or we can cancel it if a project goes into foreclosure, because that would technically be in contradiction of the exemption certificate.
Right.
So we could cancel it, or we could transfer it to the new owner. It would be entirely up to us.
Yeah, and that could be looked at a case by case basis.
Case by case basis,
okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Batoye.
Thank you for your presentation. I agree with the comment that was made about 15 years. I don't think I'm comfortable increasing for 15 years arbitrarily. I'd like to review it after. How often are we going to be reviewing this bylaw if it passes?
Through your worship to Councillor Batoye, we're proposing annually.
Annually, okay, perfect. So I think that's a good time to review it. But my first question is, I know that within this bylaw, it's not a requirement to do like an environmental assessment on these properties, but is there somewhere else in the process that they have to do an assessment to ensure that, we're not exposing our residents to contamination and stuff like that?
Through your worship to Councillor Batoye, it would probably be at some point during the development approvals process. Ms. Duguid-Smith could maybe speak to that a little better than I could.
Okay.
But my understanding, and it goes back to those three requirements. Right. For a site to be suitable for development or redevelopment, it obviously has to be remediated.
Right, exactly. Okay, perfect. Thank you. My second question is, so you have a total capital cost here of 14 million. Now I'm thinking labor costs, supply chain issues, that number has the potential of being really far higher, right, say in a few years. So why are we not putting a cap on the tax exemption? I know we have that 5%, but because the capital cost total has a potential to go haywire, does it make sense to put a cap on the total tax exemption per applicant?
Through your worship to Councillor Batoye, it is something that can be implemented. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't be able to recommend for or against it at this point. I'd have to look into it more. But just anecdotally, I would think placing a limit on it could potentially impact the value of this type of program to a builder.
Right.
As their costs increase, they would like to have some certainty that the incentive that they would receive at the end of it would increase along with it.
And I mean, I like the fact that it's going to be reviewed annually, right? So I think, if it's going to be annually, then I think it totally makes sense to review at that point.
Okay.
And just my final question is, Just my final question, and I'm done. So the page 5 of your request for decision, the very first paragraph and the last sentence, it says that the total tax exemption will be based on the lower of the actual capital cost or the estimated costs included in the application. My question is, at the point of the tax exemption, we already do have the actual capital costs. So why we comparing these two? You get what I'm saying, right?
Indeed.
Right.
Through your worship to Councillor Batoy, the purpose for that is to ensure, I guess, accuracy in what we're receiving. It's to prevent a developer from coming in estimating capital costs at significantly higher than what they will actually be, and therefore inflating the value of the actual incentive. Versus if they came in and said, we're estimating it to be much lower than their actual costs are. So it really, it's just a tool to ensure that what they're providing us in terms of their estimates during the application process is as accurate as they can be.
But they don't get a tax exemption until the cost has actually been spent, the capital cost has actually been spent. So those are not really saying the purpose of, but that's okay.
Through your worship to Councillor Batoy, again, it's more about predictability for us as well. So understanding what they're proposing, what the amount of taxes that we would potentially be exempting, to have that information in advance of, to help us with some planning processes, of course. But then, of course, we will look at what the actual costs are and select the lowest of the two.
Okay, Councillor Blizzard.
I do have a couple questions. So do current projects fall under this, or is this going forward? Because we do have some development already in the mall site.
Your worship, to Councillor Blizzard, projects that are currently under construction and will not be complete until this bylaw is passed would be eligible. However, anything that's currently constructed and operational and occupancy has been granted would not be eligible. We will not grandfather.
Okay, so someone under construction can still apply for it?
Could, in theory, still apply, yes, okay. Correct.
And is this so, a developer builds condos, and let's just use because of the space the mall site, and they build, I see your nice picture here, that looks like a big condo building, could be apartment rentals. So if they sell them all, it's a tax exemption, does that apply to the new owners?
Your worship, through the Council Blizzard, again, it would be up to us. We could transfer the exemptions to the owners, and that could be part of the incentive for selling these condos. And again, if they're able to pre-sale a lot of these condos, that will help them move forward, as the economics are really good for them. But again, it would be up to us as the city if that's something we want to consider.
Okay. And one more thing, I think the 10-year to me is enough. Not to go beyond that. I just think that's carrying it forward a long way.
And only in the form of a question, because we're not debating. I know a couple have said that, but okay. All right. Thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Yes, thank you. And Mark, thank you for your report again. Nice to see you. Point of clarification. The 10 to 15 year isn't an arbitrary change. In fact, that change has not been made yet. That's up to council at this meeting. Is that correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, that is correct.
Thank you. Now, we've had give this a lot of thought, Mark. When we talk about cost as the basis for the 5%, we get into all kinds of strange permutations about what is cost. How do we calculate cost? How do we prove cost? Is it cost before or cost after? Why didn't administration just simply look at the change in assessment value for the property and apply the 5% on that number, which removes a whole bunch of hurdles and difficulties in my mind?
Your worship, to the Councillor Kelly, I don't have a great answer for that. It is something we considered. However, I don't recall the reasons we went with capital costs. It is something I could go get more information for you if you prefer.
I struggle. I have comments on it. We can leave it for now, Mark. Thank you. Any more questions? Just bear with me for a second, please. What is the purpose of this program? I know that sounds like a pretty straightforward and simple question, but I would like the answer, please.
Your Worship, to Councillor Kelly, the purpose of this program is to encourage multifamily and mixed-use development in the downtown.
More specifically, though, correct?
Correct.
In brownfield sites that have potentially environmental issues, is that not correct?
That is correct.
So, if I were to paraphrase, it's to encourage development in the downtown core on sites that are probably problematic. Would that be a correct statement?
Your Worship, to Councillor Kelly, that would be correct.
So, what's the worst thing that can happen with this program in your estimation?
Your Worship, to Councillor Kelly, it's either not successful at all or it's too successful.
What do you mean by not successful? And secondly, what do you mean by too successful?
Apologies. Your Worship, to Councillor Kelly, not successful would mean we get no applications in a kind of reasonable period, 2 to 5 years. Too successful would be we have too many applications, some of them requiring significant remediation costs, where the amount of taxes that we are now exempting is starting to increase dramatically.
But if we were to base the 5% on change in assessment value, then it doesn't matter what any of the costs are. Would that not be correct? Because it would be a formula based on the tax roll increase to the tax roll to the city.
Your Worship, to Councillor Kelly, that is correct. However, I don't know that the assessment value would take into consideration things like remediation costs, which we identified during first reading as potentially being included. I did recall actually while you were speaking, one of the other reasons we did look at not using a change of assessment and more of a capital cost. And it really goes back to one of the reasons we didn't use a per door incentive, in that it does not, that type of incentive really just focuses on building as much as you can and packing in as many residents as you can to maximize the value. Whereas if you go on a per capita basis, you're really encouraging that developer to take a bit of an architectural creative license to really create a space or to create a project that aligns with the vision of downtown. And it's something that can fit in with what we hope and what we foresee downtown Fort Sask to be. Because of course, to do that requires additional costs to the developer, and doing it on a capital basis would actually take into account those additional capital costs. So it would encourage them to do it, because the more they would spend, the more they get back at the end.
Okay, one more question, if I may. You indicated in your previous response that one of your concerns might be that the program is too successful and a whole bunch of remediation costs end up costing the city a lot of money. The alternative to that, I would believe, Mark, and I'm looking for a clarification, is that those remediation costs, number one, are necessary. We're assuming they're necessary, the money wouldn't be spent. So those remediation costs, in fact, will not be spent, not incurred, and the land will sit in its current state in the downtown core for the next generation or two. How do you see that prospect resolving itself?
Your Worship, to Councillor Kelly, we would be looking at a similar type program at that point, where we would look at things like remediation costs to be included to incent the development, or at some point maybe the downtown action plan is quite successful and we're able to really change the economics of downtown development.
Okay, so I can come back to you later if you like. I've got Councillor.
Just a second, please. If you're going to interrupt, please, Mercatcher, at least give me a chance to respond. I lost my train of thought, so yes, please come back.
Okay, I've got Councillor Macon next.
Thank you for your presentation, Mark. Not sure if I'm going to ask this with clarity here. I'm just curious about the Fort Station and the way that it's written into the bylaw as like Schedule A eligible properties. When you're looking at the map that shows Fort Station as an eligible property, that's not one property, right? That's possibly 15 properties. Are we implying that every single property in there qualifies for this? I would think not. So I just wanted to, I was just curious if we've put this properly into the Schedule A of the bylaw should it pass.
Your worship, the councillor may can, again, it's really up to council. But what we are saying by putting that red box around Fort Station is that yes, all the individual properties within that would qualify for this. Again, it would be up to council if you want to exclude some or not. The reason the entire property was included is that in its original form, it had a number of uses that would have that is reasonably believed to lead to contamination, including the Shell gas station, former Canadian Tire site, and other uses along those lines. So rather than get too deep into the weeds on this one, we felt there was reasonable basis to just include the entire site as it is, including all different properties within it.
Sure. So I guess there's no risk that something in there doesn't qualify? Like we've looked at them? So that somebody comes and they look and they say, oh, my property qualifies for this, but in actual fact it doesn't. Just curious. Your
worship, that a councillor making to get to that point would require environmental assessments. Okay. And again, the Municipal Government Act is written in such a way that it does give us a little bit of a discretion in this, and that if we were wrong at the end of the day, unless we are legally challenged, which the chances of which are quite low, there really is no issue with what we've done in this case. Okay. Because we do have the reasonable basis to believe that the site could be contaminated based on past use.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you. So I've got one additional question that was generated. So when you talk about you're going to review it annually, my question is, if this is approved tonight, and if the amendments were put in to extend it to 15 years, then that's set. That doesn't change. That would require a bylaw change. Like, I just need everybody to be really clear about when you say we're going to review annually, but we're not going to make changes to the bylaw annually, are we?
Through to your worship, that would be up to council. During annual review, if council wishes to amend the bylaw, they can.
But my question is, if we approve it tonight, somebody goes forward with a development like you showed on that, then they're eligible for up to the 15 years, depending on how things work out.
Through to your worship, it would depend on when the tax certificate is. I apologize for hedging, but it would depend on when the tax certificate is issued. So if their construction period takes more than a year, then in theory, no, they would not get the 15 years. However, if they were built and occupancy was granted before the bylaw was amended by council in future, then the certificate that they have would state the taxation years, and it would be the 15 years.
Okay, that's what I wanted clarity on. Thank you. Okay, I'll come back to you, Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. Question of yourself, Mayor Catcher. We got into a discussion, the two of us, at the first reading about when changes can be made to this proposed bylaw. When exactly can motions be made tonight?
So let's see it. They've got amendments in the motions because we've done first reading. So once the motions, whoever puts it on, we're starting with any amendments to start with before we give it second reading as amended. So there's a series of amendments, and then if there's any other ones, that would happen before we give it second reading as amended. So right from the get.
Before we give it second reading, in other words, the motion has to be made, but before second reading is voted on.
Right. So as soon as the public hearing is closed, then whoever wishes to, there's amending bylaw amendments to it. Those can come on, or if somebody wants to put a different amendment on, that could come on at the same time and we'd discuss and debate it. Ms. Hexley would need a moment to type them in, but all of these amendments would be made prior to second reading.
Okay, thank you.
Are you good?
And I'm done. I'm good, thank you.
Okay, good. That appears to be all of the questions, Mr. Morrissey. Now, I believe there has been nobody that has registered to speak in favor or opposed. We did receive one email just with some suggestions, but not really speaking in favor or opposed, just with some suggestions that council should think about. So that was it. So since nobody has registered or is in the audience to speak in favor or opposed, I'll just double check with the council. Are there any final questions of Mr. Morrissey in the public hearing? If not, I will close the public hearing at 4 p.m. and we will go into business arising from the public hearing.
Thank you, Your Worship. In the interest of time, I don't have any follow-up information or presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions council may have with regards to motions.
Okay, thank you. So in your packages, I don't know if you want to put the motions up in your packages. There are several motions. There are some that to amend that we will do each one of these separately in case. So what is the wish of council? Councillor Macon, go ahead.
I can make the first motion that bylaw C-1522 be amended to include the following sections. Do you want me to read it out?
Yes, please.
Okay. 3.1B6, not be the subject of an application or grant under a city's downtown development grant program. And 6.3, the city manager in his or her sole discretion and at the expense of the applicant engage the services of external auditors, contractors, or agents of the city to assist with or conduct the review of documents or information provided by the applicant under section 5.5 or 6.2 of this bylaw.
Thank you. And Ms. Exley, we are going to sever these so then each one would be an amendment. So number 2 would be separate so we can discuss and debate each one of these. Okay, so would you like to speak in favor of this motion?
Only to say that I believe that they are safeguards for the city and I believe that they are good amendments. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up for discussion and debate on this motion. Councillor Kelly.
Yes, thank you. I'm not in favor of the first section on this motion, not be the subject of an application or grant. I know it sometimes feels like the city is perhaps giving too much away to business when we talk about things like this. I think it behooves council to sit back for a second and just think about really the properties in the downtown core that we're talking about here. We are talking about problematic properties, some of which have sat vacant now for decades. Vacant property, unsightly property, undeveloped property in our downtown core does not help the value of the downtown core and does not improve our city in any way whatsoever. I stress again, these are the most problematic lots or pieces of property for development. Anything that could have any sort of environmental concern is going to be a tough thing to get developed at the best of times. It would be very difficult, for instance, for a purchaser to get a mortgage or any sort of financing on any property that could have environmental concerns. There are steps and hoops that would have to be done. And if in fact significant remediation costs have to be completed because it's best for our community before the development takes place, somehow this city has to be in a position to encourage that. If we don't encourage it properly, my fear is that the first of Mr. Morrissey's fear actually would come true, that we're just going to sit with these empty lots. We're going to have wasted our time on this particular proposal, this particular bylaw, and nothing is going to be done to improve the functionality, attractiveness, or appearance or desirability of our downtown core. Excuse me 1 second, please. Apologies for that. So I personally have no problem because of the nature of these lots that there be some double dipping. I would just add to that, though, that thought of mine, that if in fact the grant, you're eligible for the grant, that be deducted off of the grant proceeds. Obviously, would be deducted off of the eligible costs to arrive at the base number for the 5%. To stop true double dipping, in other words, getting a grant on monies that we didn't actually spend, that were city monies. So I'm not in favor of it. I think there should be the ability to take advantage of both programs for this particular series of properties in our downtown core. And I would encourage council to, in fact, not vote for this, and in fact ensure that in fact that the problem properties are eligible for both programs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Noyan next on discussion and debate.
Yeah, thank you. And I do appreciate that perspective, Councillor Kelly. I would, as this is, we're initiating this policy, this program, I would rather err on the side of caution, being eligible for a grant and being eligible for tax exemption at the same time when this program has not been unveiled yet. I think we'd be prudent to perhaps wait 1 year to see how many applications for this program we receive prior to allowing grant funding concurrently. Now that's just a different perspective. It's not necessarily the right perspective or going to entice development in our downtown core. But I think it would be good to see how the program plays out after its application before we allow granting and tax exemption.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Abatoye.
I support the motion, but before I speak on the motion, I'd like to ask Mr. Morrissey a question. So we're moving 500,000 to the financial stabilization reserve for these two, the tax incentive and the grants. Is there a plan on how we want to divide them between the two, or is it just based on how we receive the applications?
Your Worship, to the Councillor Bitoye, it would be based on application, as they are two separate programs, so there would be two separate application processes.
Right, but it's been funded from the same purse, right? The Economic Development Reserve.
Your Worship, to the Councillor Bitoye.
The other one is the tax incentive. Sorry, exemption. Sorry about that. Yeah, dumb question. Anyways, so no, I do support the motion, and I agree with what Councillor Noyan just said. There are two different programs that's been said, and the Brownfield tax incentive. I think that's a specific program, but for the other program, the development grants, applicants that qualify for these cannot qualify for the other ones. I think it's just really important for us to separate it, as has been said, because it's a pilot, so I'd really like to see how it goes in the next 1 year, and then we can reconsider. But for now, I think that's, we should just leave as is and just keep them separate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any additional questions on or discussion and debate on this motion. Councillor Macon, anything on close? Oh, I'm sorry. Remember, hit that button.
That's okay. Yeah, so I'm going to continue to support the motion. I think that for the one that we are going to be debating later on in this meeting, there's only so much money in that fund. So I think opening up both of them to one type of property is a mistake at this time. I think that there is good reason to separate them and have certain types of properties qualify for one, whereas the other ones will qualify, because the ones that we're debating later, they won't qualify for the tax abatement, and those properties need as much support as we can give them as well. So I do like the way this is written, and I will continue to support it.
Okay, thank you. The motion is now closed. For the first one, please cast your vote. That is carried 6-1. Thank you very much. Would you like to continue with the second motion? I don't think you have to read it all in. I think it can be just as presented. Yes. Oh, right. There you go.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad I don't have to read that all. I'll make the motion that the following wording and phrasing amendments be added to bylaw C-1522, which adds clarity and certainty to the bylaw as presented.
Thank you. Would you like to speak in favor of your motion?
Only that I think that these few amendments strengthen the policy. Thanks.
Okay.
Excuse me, Your Worship. At your request, we split the motion, so we're actually voting on the second portion of the first motion that you likely have in front of you. So this would be
I read
the
the whole
amendment to
thing.
She read the
6.3.
whole thing into the first one.
Okay, we're just going to have to cast a vote for purposes of eScribe. We split the motion.
I wasn't splitting that motion. I had just said we're going to do number 1, we're going to do number 2, we're going to do number 3. That was my intention. It wasn't splitting the two of them.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. I'll be more clear next time because I thought it was all under one, but it wasn't. I saw it wasn't. So, okay, we're on to the second motion. It's open for discussion and debate. Councillor Harris.
Just to clarify for process, so number 2 has got several parts, 2.19, A and B, 3.1A, 4, 2, going down. So anything between 2 and 3 is subject to this particular motion. Let's make that patently clear.
Yep, that's clear.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Did you have anything on discussion and debate?
I do not.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else have anything on discussion and debate on this motion? Councillor Kelly, I'm watching you on live stream, so if you do put your hand up, I can see you faster. So go ahead.
Thank you. I didn't realize that the second motion had been made. I thought we got interrupted on there. So I want to be, I know Councillor Harris just asked this question, but I'm looking at it as I speak. So anything under 2, including 2.19 through to 7.1A is the subject of this particular vote?
That's correct.
All right. I do have a question to start with of administration. Applicants must submit a non-refundable application fee. How large is this application fee proposed to be?
Your Worship, to Councillor Kelly, that will be brought forward on June 14th as part of the fees and charges bylaw amendment, and it's estimated to be about $1,500 per application. This is based on the amount of staff time required to both review the application and make approvals, and then of course review the final documentation and reports at the end.
I'm stumbling on this, Mark. It's our program. I would imagine that we would administer our program without a fee. I get your position, but I don't think that it's necessary. I'd like to, for the purpose of this vote, Mayor Catcher, divide the motion and let's vote on 3.1A, 3.1A IV bracket 2 separately. No, pardon me. I'm sorry, it's 4.1B. I read the wrong line. Let's treat 4.1B as a separate motion.
Okay, so are you asking for an amendment to remove that piece?
I'm asking for it to be treated as a separate motion, however that has to happen.
Mr. Kaiser?
It would be a request to split, which can be done without a vote.
Yeah. Okay, so...
And I...
Yeah, so we'll split that. So the motion will deal with everything except the 4.1B, and we'll deal with that one after. Okay?
Perfect, thank you.
All right, so okay, so I'm going to anything further on discussion and debate on those? If not, anything on close, Councillor Macon? You're good? Okay, so I'm going to close the motion, and it's for everything into excluding the 4.1B.
Okay, we'll just need a minute to iron out the formatting in eScribe.
Okay.
Thanks.
While we're waiting for her to do that, you should introduce, we neglected, I couldn't see before, it was really small, that you have Aaron Duncan joining us as well. Just hit your button.
Yes, apologies, Your Worship. Joining us virtually is Miss Erin Duncan, our new Economic Development Officer. We've promoted her from her role as Downtown Coordinator.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I could only see her like half an inch by half an inch. I couldn't see her. Okay, so so you should be able to see that on the screen now. So that's the motion, severing the 4.1B. Okay, so if there's no further discussion and debate on that portion of it, I will close the motion. Please cast your vote.
I'm sorry, Your Worship. Can I take a 5-minute break? eScribe's not working.
Okay, we'll take a, let's see, it's 4:17. Yeah, we'll take a 5-6 minute break.
5 or 5-6?
4:25, be back in your chairs. We will stand at recess. Give you 7 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, just before we begin, Miss Exley, did that vote didn't come up for the second one, did it? No. Okay, so we'll just give Councillor Kelly a moment to rejoin us. There he is. Okay, so we have everybody back. So Miss Exley, if you've got eScribe working now, the motion is closed. If you can put it up for us to vote.
So, Your Worship, we're just waiting for Councillor Abitoy.
Okay. Just use your card. Okay. Thank you. The motion is carried. Now, if you can put the second part of that motion up. Pardon? Mr. Kaiser, does that need to be reread in that way?
That would be my preference.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Go ahead, Councillor Macon.
Thank you. Oh, there it is on the screen in front of me. I'll make the motion that Council add the following section to Bylaw C-1522, 4.1b. Applicants must submit a non-refundable application fee in accordance with the city's fees and charges bylaw.
Would you like to speak to the motion?
I will actually speak in favor of this. I believe that every fee that we have coming out of planning that has to do with construction and building all is based on staff time. And I don't know why we would do anything differently with this one. I think it would be a move away from our typical protocols. And I do believe that just like any other application fee that we have, if there's staff time associated with it, then that's how the fee should be established.
Okay, thank you. It's open for discussion and debate. And I'm just going to leave your microphone on, so just be quiet. So when I can come back to close. Councillor Kelly, you're next on discussion and debate.
Yes, thank you. I understand Councillor Macon's comment. I just would suggest that this isn't a standard application fee. The standard application fee will be the building permit process, which will include fees. This is a fee to administer our program. And I find it, to be honest, nonsensical. We're going to give you something, but first you have to pay us. I don't understand that thinking. I really don't. Furthermore, it's important, I stress this, we're talking about incentivizing the most difficult parcels of property for development within the city of Fort Saskatchewan. The most difficult. The worst thing that can happen is that we're not successful and they stay undeveloped. That is the worst alternative. And for sake of a $1,500 fee, it's just additional red tape. It doesn't look good. It doesn't sound good. Here's your lottery winning, but first it sounds like a phone call I might get from someplace overseas where I've won the lottery, but first I have to send them money to collect it. I believe it downgrades the purpose of the program. I believe it's hypocritical. I don't think we need it, and I would encourage council to suggest in this particular case that we simply don't need the fee. I understand the timing, understand the time commitment by staff, but understand our motive. let's not ever forget our motive when we talk about this particular bylaw. It's to encourage development on very difficult parcels of property within Fort Saskatchewan. And it's that simple. And $1,500 is neither here nor there if in fact we get a parcel of property developed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Abatoye on the motion.
Yeah, I do not support the motion. I agree that we should charge fees for service provided. But in this case, I almost see this as a grant, right? I wouldn't apply for a grant that says, oh, by the way, you have to pay X amount of dollars. You know, that's the way I see this. And I honestly don't think that we should be charging fees for this specific incentive, because it's called an incentive for a reason, right? So encourage people to, you know, come and participate in this project. And I don't think, as Councillor Kelly said, it's an additional red tape that's I really do not support. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, thank you. I would agree with some of these comments. 1,500 seems a little bit high for an application to a program of this type. However, I'm not sure if administration can bring back maybe a breakdown of the fees as proposed for June 14th, so council can have a look and have a better understanding of what that fee structure looks like. I think that would be valuable. The motion as it stands right now, like I would support more of a nominal fee, but what that looks like and what that could cover maybe in question for future discussion.
Mr. Morrissey.
Your Worship, with Councillor Nguyen, the breakdown is something we can bring in. It is work that we have done, and council can at that point adjust the fee as they see fit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that'd be valuable.
Okay, thank you. I was next in the speaking order, so I will support this motion. I think, you know, without having some type of fee, what's going to happen is, you know, you may have a lot of people that just decide to come in and test the waters and say, you know what, yeah, I'll see if I'm eligible for it, and consume a lot of staff time. And I know $1,500 or whatever the dollar amount is that it ends up being, you know, in a project that's probably $1 million project isn't substantial. But what it does is it says, you know what, hey, we're serious, we're coming, and yes, we're going to utilize staff time for this, which, as we know, everybody pays for staff time, so we want to make sure that there is some sort of benefit coming back. But I think the biggest thing is it just says to the applicant, we're serious, you know, because otherwise everybody just comes and says, oh, I'll just come and, you know, do me an application and then I'll think about it and I'll get back to you. So that's kind of why I support this. I just think it keeps everybody good foundation. Councillor Harris.
I believe Councillor Kelly makes a good point. I don't see the need for the fee given what we're trying to accomplish here. Obviously, we have staff that are here. They're being paid to do work. And under normal circumstances, ultimately, the fees and charges do not recover their staff time. I appreciate your comment, Mayor Ketcher, but I think Councillor Kelly made a good point, and I won't support the motion.
Okay, thank you. So I'm at the top of the order again. So Councillor Macon on discussion and debate.
So listening to the comments, I think some valid points have been made, but I think that what I would suggest is that people support this motion, and then when it comes back to fees and charges on June 14th, we can take a closer look at what the actual cost is going to be and what that entails, and then at that time we could vote to remove it or reduce it to $100 if we wanted to. So I would recommend at least keeping this in for now, and we can amend that come June 14th when we have the whole picture.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. Question mark. At what stage in the process would the fee be levied? It wouldn't be, I would hope, when somebody gets the application and fills out the application form. At what stage precisely would the fee be levied or due?
Your Worship, to the Councillor Kelly, the fee would be required prior to review, the formal review of the application. So they could take the application, complete it. We would work with them to kind of answer any questions they have. and provide that service. That's something we've always done and will continue to do. But before we can actually physically enter into the review period, we would require that fee.
What do you mean by review period?
So when right now it would be about 4 different staff from across the city to look at that application. The fee would need to be paid before those review individuals would look at the application and render a decision.
How would this tie into the building permit, development permit process? It would seem to me that staff would look at the development permit and offer some sort of confirmation based on the application for development as to whether or not it would fit without a fee. So doesn't this go hand in hand? And if in fact the development permit is turned down, why would this particular fee not be refunded? I'm not seeing how this ties together. So help me understand the total package. A developer eyes a piece of property, wants to do something with it, and then what happens next? And walk me through the process, please.
Certainly, and I may ask Ms. Duguid-Smith or Mr. Thomas to join me to talk about the development permit process, because it's not an area I'm well versed. In terms of making the decision and where it fits, I mean, we're not going to ask an applicant to say, "Hey, cut us a check," and then we're cross your fingers. We'll obviously work with them in advance. We'll work with them through the development permit or pre-development permit stage. We've always done that. We're one of the first municipalities to actually do that, where the applicant will come in and sit down with our engineering staff, with our public works staff, with our planning staff, and we'll work through the project so that they have certainty prior to their application that what they're proposing will align with the land use bylaw, will get their permits. So we'll take a similar approach to this, where we will sit down, walk them through the process, saying these are the requirements of the bylaw. These are the requirements that you will need you'll need to have in place prior to approval. So they'll walk into this with a full expectation of what we are going to require, and they are able to structure their application and their project as such. In terms of where it fits within the development process, I would have to defer to Ms. Duguid-Smith or Mr. Thomas.
Would you please?
Ms. Duguid-Smith, would you like to come on?
Through your worship, it really depends. What may happen is an applicant may be interested in determining whether or not they'll receive the grant before they move forward with a project. So in that case, they would come in before the development permit, but it could be after as well.
Okay, thank you. It's kind of what I suspected. But based on Mr. Morrissey's comments, it would seem to me, and I would agree if I'm correct, that tire kickers are encouraged. In fact, you wouldn't mind talking to a whole bunch of people with their ideas, and you're going to fully explain, fully discuss, take the time that's necessary to walk everybody through the program. And once everybody's serious, then the fee would be levied. But that's once everybody's serious and everybody has a clear understanding of the program, the development, and its prospects. Is that correct?
Your worship, to Councillor Kelly, that's correct. I've got all the time in the world for people who want to talk about potential development.
So really the fee then isn't for the application so much as for the monitoring that would take place subsequent to the application.
Your worship, to Councillor Kelly, that is correct. That is a significant portion of the fee.
Thank you. I still don't agree with the fee, but at least we know that we're not eliminating tire kickers. We encourage tire kickers. That's how we make sales. That's how every car gets sold in the land. Somebody walks on a lot just interested. So I support the efforts, Mr. Morrissey, that you plan on having or taking with these particular individuals should they arise. I still don't think that the fee is necessary. There is no sense to keep it on in my mind, so that we can reduce it to $100 at our June meeting or our budget meeting. I fail to see the purpose and the need for that. And it might in fact get overlooked. There are some, trusting my memory here, 20 pages single-spaced of various fees that the city has. This will be but one single line item in that 20 pages. Either the fee makes sense and it's meaningful, or we don't have it. In this case, I don't think it's meaningful, and I don't think it makes sense, and I don't think we should have it. And a nominal fee makes absolutely 0 sense. And we're not trying to discourage tire kickers. In fact, we encourage them. So the fee makes no sense, everybody, and I encourage you to vote against this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Macon on close.
Nothing further, thanks.
Okay, the motion is now closed. Please cast your vote. Motion is carried 4-3. Thank you very much. Right, we can continue on with, pardon? Does somebody else want to jump in and do part of it? Go ahead. I can. Councillor Harris, did you want to do number 3? It's right here.
I would move.
Oh, sorry.
I would move that council amend bylaw C15-22, section 5.9 as follows. 5.9, subject to provisions as bylaw. An exemption may apply for the following taxation years, 2023 and up to 2037.
Do you wish to speak to the motion?
I initially was fine with 10 years. This is 15 years then?
Yes.
Correct? And you know, obviously we're gonna start somewhere, so we want it to be cost effective and I think attractive for a developer to do. So I'm fine with 15 years then.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly on discussion and debate.
Again, points for clarification from administration, please. Approximately our mill rate on residential property is 0.5 percentage point or 5 mills.
Your worship, to Councillor Kelly, that is my understanding.
Thank you. So if we're offering a 5% property tax rebate on residential property at the current mill rate, and I hope it doesn't increase substantially going forward, at the current mill rate, it will take approximately 10 years to get the benefit of the 5% property tax rebate or abatement. Is that not correct?
Your worship, to Councillor Kelly, yes, the modeling that we've provided does show approximately 10 to 11 years of exemptions.
10 to 11 years of exemptions to take advantage of the 5% abatement, correct?
Your worship, to Councillor Kelly, it would be 100% abatement per annual, but it would be to a total of 5% of the capital costs.
Well, that's what I'm referring to when I speak of the 5%.
Apologies, yes.
So if we don't extend the time frame and we cap it at a definite calendar date being 10 years from essentially today's year, 2 years down the road, it's impossible, or 3 years down the road, it would be impossible for a new development to capture the 5% rebate because there just wouldn't be enough years left. Is that correct?
Your worship, to Councillor Kelly, it would depend on the capital costs, but based on the modeling that we have, you are correct.
I'm not sure I agree with that comment, but it doesn't matter. And certainly 5 years down the road, the problem gets worse. So the value of the program, Mark, begins to depreciate starting 1 year from today.
Your worship, to Councillor Kelly, yes, you are correct.
Thank you. And of course, this is obvious, but I think the point needs to be made again. What we're talking about here is a maximum 5% rebate on capital cost on the property tax bill. So once you've got your 5% on property taxes, you're done, regardless of how long it takes, you're done.
Your worship to Councillor Kelly, sorry, I didn't realize that was a question, but yes, you are correct. Once the total taxes exempted is equivalent to 5%, you are done, regardless of when that falls within that period.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's clear, and I hope obvious to my fellow councillors that if we don't extend the timeline on this, we're almost dead in the water. It will take some period of months for a developer to even get a handle on this program, another number of months to plan some sort of development. And by the time they're in a position to approach the city, they no longer benefit from the program as designed. And then we've got construction period. Property taxes really don't start till after the construction, or at least at full value, and costs wouldn't be known. So it would be impossible to say to a person with a straight face, we're giving you a 5% of costs back on a property tax rebate, when we know that there's not enough years in the program left for that to in fact happen. So it's not, the number of years is inconsequential. What is meaningful is whether or not we determine 5% rebate on cost through a property tax credit or abatement is worthwhile. And I would hope that we would get developers that would apply for it and want it. And again, hopefully they get it, and hopefully they won't get it unless the development is finished. We need to be clear on that too. This is abatement after the fact, not in advance. So a number of years is inconsequential. And if we don't extend the number of years, our program is depreciated in value almost the day we pass it. So I think it only makes sense that we extend the number of years on at least this trial basis and see what happens. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Abatoye on discussion and debate.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Morrissey, I just listened to the conversation between you and Councillor Kelly, and it seems like what you said makes sense. And I'm just wondering, why did we come forward with 10 years initially?
Your worship, Councillor Abatoye, 10 years was suggested initially because that is, it aligns with other similar programs. So the Heartland Incentive Program does look at about a 10-year period as well. But what Councillor Kelly is proposing also does make sense because it does factor in construction timelines, etc.
So we're probably not reinventing the wheel. It's really possible that other municipalities have similar programs. What have you seen?
Your worship, through to Councillor Abatoye, other municipalities have similar timeframes between 10 and 15 years.
Okay, so we
would not be out of the norm.
Okay, so I'm going to think about this a little, because I was actually of the opinion that it's necessary for us to be a little conservative for now, because again, we're going to be reviewing this annually. So I think it's easier to say, hey, we're going to increase it to 15 years after 1 year, and say, oh no, we're going to go down, to 10 years. And so because this is a pilot, I'd like to see it for 1 year, and then we can reconsider at that point. But again, I'm sitting on the fence just because I heard that conversation that you guys just had, and it absolutely makes sense. So I'm going to think about it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bacon.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think my comments are right along the lines of what Councillor Kelly was saying. We want people to take this up, and to me, whether it's 10 years or 20 years, it's inconsequential. We want them to take advantage of the 5%. So it shouldn't matter how long it really takes them to do that. We don't want to cap it at 10 and know right off the bat they can't make their 5%. So I really do think 15 is reasonable, and we'll come back and review it yearly as we said we would. But like Councillor Kelly said, I don't see a reason why that we should be limiting this program right from the get-go. Putting it up to 15 makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm next on the speaking order. So I guess the question that I have, so initially 10 years, was that not to really try and get these developers of these properties to get their act together to do something? And I guess the question that I ask that is, all of a sudden then you push it out 15 years and they go, oh, well, I can let it slide for another year or 2 years or 3 years and I can still fit within that window. So is it really a benefit to push it out that far? Because it's new, and it's saying if you want to take advantage of this, you need to start doing something now. So what was the original thought with that?
Your Worship, through to Your Worship, sorry, that was the initial impetus behind the 10 years, was to kind of spur activity sooner rather than later. However, it is quite a balancing act between kind of setting a time limit and lighting a fire under someone, and then, of course, providing or reducing the value of the program as you kind of move forward through that time frame, as Councillor Kelly has talked about. It is a difficult balancing act. It's difficult to kind of say which would be a better approach. It really is up to each individual development and developer. So I don't have a good answer for you. I'm sorry.
Okay, and I've been struggling with this because I was quite comfortable with the 10-year time frame, because that's what the Heartland Incentive Program was doing as well. I guess my only concern is you push it out to, say, 15 years. We could be sitting here still in 3 years and seeing nothing happening because there's a grace period in there. And that's my only fear. We go to all this work, we start doing this, and then still nothing happens, and we're still sitting here waiting, scratching our heads. So I probably won't be supporting the 15 years, but just on that basis. But it's just something really to ponder and think about. Do we want to get these developers to really say, you know what, if I want to take advantage, I'm going to get my act together now and do it. So that's kind of where my thought is at. Councillor Nguyen?
Yeah, thank you. So hypothetically, if we play this out and just bear with me as I paint a picture of a possible scenario. So say at the 10-year mark, we have 1/3 of these properties that have and developers that have applied for the Brownfield tax exemption. They've gone through, they're getting closer to completion. Other developers get wind of this program and they want to now invest in the downtown Brownfield areas. Why couldn't an amendment be made to this program, just extending the years, by 5 or whatever the case is? Say if City is in discussions with potential developers at that time when the window's closing for this program. So in that case, like it kind of becomes inconsequential, the timeline for this program, if that is a possibility, and we are assessing this annually.
Your Worship, to Councillor Nguyen, those are good points. The one thing I would say is that the tax exemption certificate, which does dictate the taxation years that the exemption is eligible, that is issued based on the bylaw of the day. So if amendments made to the bylaw after a certificate is issued would not be reflective of that certificate. So anybody new coming in, absolutely, council can amend the bylaw and continue to extend the timelines. It's actually one of the few areas within the MGA in this particular section where we have a fair degree of flexibility. You could put in 50 years if that's what you wanted. But the certificates that have been issued would not change with the bylaw. Those would be
fall under this bylaw. Yeah.
They would follow the dates that are printed on the certificate. So any certificates issued between now and the annual review period next year, if we move forward with 10 years, they would have the 10 years time frame on that certificate. If we change it to 15, they would have the 15 years. If council changes it next year, that change would not be reflected on those certificates.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blizzard?
So when this was brought forward for first reading, it said 10 years, right? So now it's proposed to be 15. And after hearing some of the comments, how do you feel about this?
Your Worship, to the Council Blizzard, again, it's a difficult balancing act. The logic behind 10 years was to kind of spur that movement forward. However, extending the timeline to 15 years, other than combining it with the added eligibility cost of remediation, that could extend it. Combined, that could have the impact of extending the timeline and again increasing the amounts. But that only increases the value of the program. Ultimately, personally, I don't see an issue with extending it to 15 years because Councillor Kelly is correct. In all the modeling we've done, 9 out of 10 times, they will hit that 5% of capital first before they hit the timeline.
Okay, I guess my concern was just what Mayor Ketcher said was that people go, oh, we'll develop in 3 years, wait a bit.
Your Worship, to the Councillor Blizzard, that is a possibility. but again, it's a very difficult balancing act.
Okay. I think I'll support it, but it'll be interesting to see updates, whether there's any movement on this at all next year.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly?
Mark, one more question. Based on your experience with the city, what sort of time frame do you see from an initial expression of I'm interested in doing a development in the city, to the developer actually acquiring the land, getting the prints, getting the drawings, getting the plan in place, doing the business plan, submitting the drawings for a building development permit, and getting the approvals, and then starting and completing this construction? What sort of time frame or number of years would you imagine, based on your experience, that process would take start to finish? In other words, to completion of construction.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Kelly, the time frame will depend on the complexity and the size and scale. The larger the project, the more complex, the longer the timeline. I have seen projects up to 5 years and beyond. In my time here, I have seen projects that were in discussion and debate longer than I've been around. Smaller projects, typically residential, a lot of them can be done in a year. It's not unheard of. However, again, if you're looking at large multifamily units, and I will plug our planning department, they are the best in the region in terms of speed and accuracy and getting them out the door, but there are a number of other processes involved. 18 to 24 months is probably not unheard of.
And thank you. That would jive with my understanding as well. And it's fair to assume, this is a question as well, that if we're talking about doing development on land that's environmentally challenged, is that going to shorten or potentially lengthen that time frame?
Your Worship, to the Councillor Kelly, that is correct. That could double the timeline depending on the level of contamination, if present.
Just a simple review process to decide on the contamination is going to take some time. So I agree with the proposal, and I do think that it makes sense. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harris on close. You're good. All right, thank you. The motion is now closed. And this is for number 3 with the exemption dates. That is carried unanimously. Councillor Harris, would you like to do the next part of number 4?
Sure. Let me read it. I would move motion 4 as presented in our report, and that Council amend bylaw C-1522, section 2.14 as follows, as listed in the report.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to the motion?
I'm fine with it, and I'll vote accordingly.
Thank you. It's open for discussion and debate. Not seeing anything on close. Councillor Harris?
Nothing.
The motion is now closed as presented. Please cast your vote. That is carried unanimously. Councillor Nguyen, do you want to do a couple? Oh, second, I got to get your mic on, sorry. Go ahead.
I move that Council amend bylaw C-15-22 by adding the following section. Review the provisions, 10.1, the provisions and applicability of this bylaw shall be reviewed by Council on an annual basis.
Would you like to speak to the motion?
I am in favor of an annual review of this, and I hope to see some interest in our downtown core.
Okay, thank you. It's open for discussion and debate. Not seeing any, I'll close the motion. Please cast your vote. That is carried unanimously. Would you like to continue?
I move that council give second reading to bylaw C15-22 Brownfield tax exemptions as amended.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I think we've had some good discussion on this topic. I thank you, Mark, for all your work, and once again look forward to seeing the implementation of this, and hopefully brings some activity to our downtown and some improvement.
Thank you. It's now open for discussion and debate. Councillor Kelly.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to support second reading. I am particularly pleased that this bylaw will come back to council for review on an annual basis. I sincerely hope I'm wrong. I really do. But I really, really believe that with the restrictions we have on this, we're going to see very, very limited uptake. And a year from now, council is going to be looking at this and wondering what it is we do next to try to encourage some development. So hopefully I'm wrong, but I don't think that this is enough to tip the economic scales to the extent necessary to get the development, particularly in these areas of the downtown core that we need. Let's see what happens. And like I said, I'm for it, but I'm not optimistic that way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? I'll just say I support the motion. I think the City Council is really stepping up to support our downtown. You know what? You provide the tools. If they want to take advantage of them, they're there. If they choose not to, well, we'll see where we end up in a few years. But, you can only lead the horse to water. You can't make him drink it. So, we're doing everything we can. Now we just need to get our development community who owns these parcels of land to get on side and really try and do something with these parcels of land. Our downtown really is the heart and soul of our community, and we have all our events in these places, and it's just such a wonderful, wonderful area. So I'm crossing my fingers this will be a good step forward. Councillor Nguyen on close. You're closed. Thank you. The motion is now closed. Please cast your vote. That is carried unanimously. You might as well do third, and then I'll have our other two when we get to the next motions.
Sure. I move that council give third reading to bylaw C15-22 Brownfield tax exemptions.
Thank you. Do you have anything further to speak in favor?
Nothing further.
Anything further on discussion and debate? Not seeing any. I'll close the motion. Please cast your vote. And that is carried unanimously. Now, our last break was kind of not planned for. I just thank you very much, Mr. Morrissey. Our last break wasn't planned for, so I'm just going to do a quick check of council. Would you like about a 10-minute break right now? Would that, otherwise we're probably going to push through?
Yes, please.
Okay, so is 10 minutes and let's make it 5:15. That'll give everybody 12 minutes, and then we will resume. So we are on break.
Mic check.
Okay, we'll ask Councillor Kelly to rejoin us virtually. Then we will get started. Councillor Kelly, are you there? There you are. Thank you. All right. The next item that we have is revised operating and capital budgets policy FIN-024-C adoption. Go ahead, Mr. Eamon.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Your Worship and members of Council. My name is Jeremy Eamon, the City's Chief Financial Officer, and I'm here to present proposed amendments to the Operating and Capital Budgets Policy FIN-24-C for Council's consideration and decision. The original budget policy was approved or adopted by Council on September 17, 2017. Its purpose was to establish principles and guidelines for the preparation of the City's operating and capital budgets in accordance with the Municipal Government Act. On May 22, 2018, Council approved a motion to begin a phased approach to the adoption of priority-based budgeting, or PBB, tools and principles, and on March 15, 2022, Council met as Committee of the Whole to discuss key aspects of the capital plan processes such as purpose, duration, supporting documentation, and a framework for the planning and approval of major capital projects. Since the original policy was adopted, continuous refinements and improvements have been made to the City's budget development and reporting processes. PBB principles and tools have been implemented, and Council has provided ongoing guidance throughout the annual budget process. As a result, updates to the policy are required. The Council report and related appendices detail the proposed policy amendments, which include a number of administrative changes to help clarify language, expand key term definitions, and align the policy with the City's current budget practices and the MGA. In addition, the revisions clarify the requirements for financial planning documents described within the budget policy, including operating and capital budgets, operating financial plan forecasts, and capital plans. Based on the recommendations and feedback received from March's Committee of the Whole meeting, most of the significant proposed policy amendments relate to processes surrounding the 10-year capital plan, including formalizing the capital plan's purpose and duration, establishing a process framework for the evaluation, planning, and approval of major capital projects, and major capital projects are defined within the policy as tangible capital assets costing over $500,000. Establishing a capital project horizon list, and finally, incorporating priority-based budgeting tools and principles into the policy. So the next few slides describe the major capital projects framework in a bit more detail. The first component of the framework is evaluation, which consists of a series of steps for evaluating major capital projects for inclusion in the capital plan. This includes background review and research into previous plans and studies, strategic direction alignment and risk analysis, utilization demands, needs, and service levels assessments, reviewing current facility assessments and costing, if applicable, PBB capital project scoring and operating program support, public input and stakeholder engagement, review of comparators, regional supply and leading practices, and finally, challenges and community needs assessments and environmental considerations. The next component of the framework is planning. This is where details of the major capital project are further defined, such as timing, scoping, and initial cost estimates. Planned capital financing sources are identified, operating impacts are determined, along with future impacts to cash flows, property taxes, debt limits, and the City's financial reserve balances. The final stage of planning involves conceptual level planning and design, where cost estimates are further refined from an initial Class 5 down to a Class 2 or better. The next component of the framework is approval by Council. For major capital projects that require design work to be completed in order to determine a Class 3 or better cost estimate, project approvals will continue to be done in two phases. The first phase consists of interim approval by Council for the cost of design work up to 10% of the major capital project cost based on a Class 5 estimate. The design process is then started, refining the scope and project definition, leading to a Class 2 or better estimate. The second phase approval by Council occurs prior to construction and covers the remainder of the design work costs and construction budgets based on a Class 2 or better estimate. Based on feedback received from March's Committee of the Whole, the revised budget policy includes a proposed amendment to identify those major capital projects within the capital plan that are scheduled to move between years 6 through 10 to years 1 through 5 for further review and scrutiny by Council. And the final component of the framework is documentation. The revised policy requires the framework to be documented for each major capital project by way of project reports with cross-references to all applicable supporting documents and data. Based on further feedback received, the proposed policy amendments also include the addition of a capital project horizon list. This is a separate listing of capital projects not currently within a 10-year capital plan due to not having a capital funding source and or an insufficiently refined scope, cost, or business case. The revised policy states that administration is to prepare the list annually for review by Council to determine whether capital projects should remain on the list, be removed, or moved for inclusion within the capital plan. When capital projects transfer from the horizon list to the capital plan, the revised policy requires them to follow the same framework as for all major capital projects. The last significant proposed amendment to the policy is the use of PBB tools and principles, which are used to assist in the development, reporting, and evaluation of operating and capital budgets, operating financial plan forecasts, and capital plans. Administration will review the application and use of PBB tools and principles on a regular basis to ensure they remain relevant and effective and maintain alignment with the city's strategic plans, goals, and initiatives. The revised policy lists the applicable PBB tools and principles that the city may use in the preparation and analysis of its annual budgets, such as program inventories and program costing, PBB scoring for both operating programs and capital projects, analysis of community and governance results and basic program attributes, focus programs and program insights to help identify opportunities to improve efficiency, free up resources, and optimize internal reallocations, program scoring reports, program budgets, and other tools that may be developed in the future. As stated in the Council report, Council has 3 alternatives available. 1, to adopt the revised budget policy as presented. 2, to refer the policy to further study at a future Committee of the Whole meeting. Or 3, make further amendments to the revised policy as desired by Council. The recommendation by administration is that Council adopt the revised operating and capital budgets policy, FIN 24-C. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'll open it up to questions. Councillor Abatoye, you're first. Okay, yeah, I've got you, Councillor Kelly, next. Okay. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iman, for the presentation. So is the plan to move away completely from the 10-year capital plan? Because I see in the revised document that you have 10-year crossed out in every area. So is the plan to not have a document called the 10-year capital plan?
Through your worship to Councillor Abatoye. In the old policy, I think the capital plan was used interchangeably with 10-year capital plan. The duration is defined under, sorry, let me just find it here. Under section 4.12, capital plans shall be prepared annually on a rolling 10-year basis and include the capital budget as year 1, years 2 through 10 will be considered a capital plan forecast. So I think in terms of your question is why did I change the term from 10-year capital plan just to capital plan and then defined it as a duration? I think there was some talk at the Committee of the Whole for duration or prior that maybe we want to look at a 5-year plan and look at a 5-year forecast. What I wanted to do is treat it as a capital plan as a requirement under the MGA and then define it as currently as 10 years.
So the MGA requires that we report a 5-year capital plan.
A minimum of 5 years.
A minimum
yes.
of 5-year capital plan. So why did we go ahead to have a 10-year? There must have been a reason why we decided to have a 10-year capital plan.
Through your worship, to Councillor Abatoye, I think we reviewed this in prior discussions on the capital budget. The 10-year plan provides a longer term plan to plan out the major capital projects, to plan out the financing required Also, the capital reserves that are often used to fund these types of projects, we can plan for the investment component of that. If we only go to 5 years, typically beyond that, it would just be a listing. This way we actually can define the years. Obviously, they're subject to change in the future due to council's review and updates. But I think the 10-year plan gives us a broader term perspective.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So, horizon list, is that even a financial term? Just kidding about that comment. So the horizon list, what's the plan to treat it? Would it come to council at every budget? Do we get to debate what's on there? Because I really hate for us to lose sight of certain projects because they've now left the 10-year capital plan or the capital plan to this horizon list.
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Abatoyas, the horizon list sits outside of the capital plan. And so for projects that are not currently within the capital plan, this is where they would sit. They would be labeled. We'd probably have very preliminary cost estimates, but we probably wouldn't have a timeline to go with them. And so, as I mentioned in my presentation, is that would be subject to council's review annually, at least annually. It could be more if needed, to determine whether some of those projects should move to the capital plan. Or be removed entirely just due to no interest in pursuing that project.
Okay, so are we going to be seeing this horizon list then in June?
Through your worship, to Councillor Abatoya, if the policy passes tonight, most likely we could, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kelly. He was actually on first. Sorry.
Thank you. And Jeremy, thank you for the great report. I'm going to take the liberty of congratulating you for what I think is some great work. And I do that because my questions might suggest to you that I think otherwise, and I really don't. So I want to draw council's attention and your attention to paragraph 3.2 or clause 3.2 in the policy, draft policy at least. This is an obvious thing, but I think it behooves some discussion and acknowledgement from council. Base budget means the previous year's approved operating budget adjusted for one-time revenues and expenses. So the starting point of the council budget deliberation is really the base budget from the prior year. Correct, Jeremy?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, yes, I would agree.
So council spends somewhere around 4 days per November talking about the operating budget, but really all we're talking about and all our council reviews in that 4 days are the roughly 2 to 3% increase in spending, increase in service level, and that's it. We don't talk really, there's no place in that discussion that I'm aware of where we talk about the base budget. Is that correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, that typically happens in a budget year, but it could be questioned, but normally it's not.
It's not, because typically administration does not put that in the program or in the document budget package, so there's nothing that comes out of it. And that's a question as well.
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, I think that with the budget policy, we need a place to start, obviously, and the base budget is last year's council approved with the one-times removed. But that's not to say that administration does not do a considerable amount of work in adjusting that budget to bring it forward for the proposed budget for council's review later in the year.
And please don't misunderstand my questions. That's why I gave you the heads up ahead of time. Mayor Catcher, I've got multiple questions. Please return to me.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blizzard, you're next.
Yeah, just one question, actually. I just noticed it says in the staff budget request that you're going to include computers, desks, cell phones. I assume that's not going to be an ongoing, like some of those items, a desk, once you have it, is probably going to last close to the life of that person being there. So how is that? Is that a one-time?
Through your worship at Councillor Blizzard, yes, that is recognized as a one-time cost for a new position.
Okay. I think that's all I have for now.
Thank you. Councillor Abatoye.
Just two more quick questions. So I see the capital expenditure is anything in excess of 10,000. So how do we track or how do we report capital costs that are less than 10,000?
Through your worship to Councillor Abitoya. So that is defined as a capital asset for accounting purposes. So anything below 10,000 would just be part of the operating budget.
Okay. Okay. And just my final question. There's a part in this document it talks about line item budgets. I thought we had moved away from that type of budgeting. So I'm just wondering why it's not in this new policy.
Through your worship to Councillor Abitoya. So it actually is part of the budget policy. There's a section later on that says that the annual budget will consist of a line item budget and a program budget. So the line item budget is basically the typical budget that you see for legislative purposes. It follows generally accepted accounting principles. It's your standard line item, so it shows the revenues and expenses, salaries and wages, printing costs, etc., and shows the comparatives to the prior year. The program budget is the priority-based budgeting budget that shows the cost by program, by operating program. So I can't forecast the future, but the line item budget is going to be around for a considerable length of time, yeah.
Well, I kind of thought that's because we started doing PBB, then we had moved away from that.
Through worship to Councillor Abitoyas, we've taken a more proactive approach to showing our budget in terms of a program based. Okay. But we still do show the line item budget. I believe it's in the appendices or was in the appendices last year, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Kelly.
Yes, thank you. Jeremy, could we look at section 4.5, please? Let me scroll to it as well. Talks about budget reallocations. The city manager, I think, is given the authority to do budget reallocations, and there's some reference in there to as long as it's not outside of scope, or that phrasing shows up. Can you please tell me what that means?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, so outside of scope would be, in simplest terms, increasing the budget. Out of scope would be increasing the salaries and wages budget that was approved by council and increasing that or a component thereof.
I'm sorry, back to your salaries and wages example, please.
So
repeat.
The best way to answer that, I think, would just say out of scope would be administration increases or makes a change to the budget that was not approved by council. That would change the dollar figure for, and my example was salary, wages, and benefits.
So, to be clear, the budget reallocations that is being contemplated in this section then cannot increase the total dollar value of the annual budget, correct? And secondly, then, would not be able to increase any particular, call it line item number within that budget, such as salaries and wages. We could reallocate within departments, but we cannot reallocate from maintenance to increase our salaries and wages budget. Is that my understanding correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, yes, that's correct.
Mr. Fleming, being that this is contained within your city manager's bylaw, did you just want to weigh in on what you would do with these?
Yes, through your worship, it's probably actually good to distinguish between the reallocation authority within the city manager's bylaw, which typically refers to reallocations that might happen throughout the course of business in the middle of a budget year. What this is referring to is in the preparation of the budget document itself. We actually strongly encourage departments to look at budget reallocations as a way to meet their needs first and foremost. So if you look at your variances from year to year, let's say you have a need for more supplies and materials in the coming year and you had money left over in your contracted services, we would encourage in the preparation of the budget to look at that reallocation. And those are typically what you see in those little notes. You know, at the end of each department section, there's all those little small font reallocation notes. That's generally what this is referring to, is those reallocations in the preparation of the budget.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Actually, that helps quite a bit. Did administration ever discuss or give any consideration to reviewing with council as part of the budget process a few of the programs on an annual basis? Obviously, we can't go to 250 each and every year. That's simply impossible. But why wouldn't we make it part of our annual budget review to look at a sampling of the programs in depth and discuss those with administration?
Through your worship, I think it could be done. I would point out, and I know this isn't exactly what you're referring to, but with the priority-based budgeting approach that we adopted, there is a process where every department is supposed to go back and kind of do more of an internal review of a select couple of programs. That doesn't engage council in the way you're talking about. And I do think that although it's not a structured process, if you look at it, there is usually 2 or 3 points throughout the year when we would do a review of a program per se. And I could give an example that I think it's at the June Cal meeting, we're coming to talk about snow clearing within our roads business unit. So that could be one example of that. So if there was a desire from council to pick a couple of programs, the easiest thing to do would be not necessarily review them during the budget. I would say is at the start of the year, we would almost pick a couple of programs and then we could schedule those in for a review during the year. And then it's easier to reflect any potential changes in the upcoming year's budget debate.
Thank you, Troy. Every time we talk about budget and reallocations, snow clearing seems to be the one we point to because it's easily understood, I suspect, and the one that our community holds near and dear. I'm referring specifically to the problems that I've had the last couple budgets with, for instance, the program in Culture and Rec for rentals, where the revenues and expenses, in my humble opinion, make no sense. I've questioned it 2 years in a row and got answers that I didn't understand and did not explain what was happening. So why wouldn't we as a council look at that sort of thing on a rotation?
Again, your worship, the simple answer would be if there's direction from council to do that, then certainly it's something we could accommodate with, as long as there's enough time given, like lead time given to bring that back to council for workup.
Okay, I appreciate that. So you're looking for a motion from council to initiate that?
Yes, your worship. If I can say it, if you'll permit me to say it more bluntly, I mean, if it's the concerns of one member of council, that doesn't necessarily require administration to act in the same way as if it is a direction from council. That would be helpful.
Understood. Mayor Catcher, I got further questions. Come back to me, please.
Okay, you're the only one that's on right now. Go ahead.
Oh man, I was afraid of that. Okay, thank you. Bear with me. Yeah, I'd like to look at paragraph 4.91, please, or clause, whichever. And it states that operating revenues shall be estimated on conservatively. I think if there's a reasonable range of values that are probable, and I stress probable, that then the bottom conservative one perhaps makes most sense, and I won't argue that. But we had a discussion in last budget around the ISDs in the community, and administration stated several times that in fact they had budgeted the revenues on those conservatively. The problem with being conservative as opposed to being probable is that it distorts the budget and it distorts the decision-making process. I would suggest rather strongly that that shall be estimated on a probable basis, or most realistic basis or most expected basis. And that will give a range from which you can choose to be conservative. I think we need to define conservative. Mr. Fleming or Jeremy, do you have any response to that statement or question?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, I think maybe without explicitly stating probable, I think that's what conservatively means in terms of this policy. It comes from the risk, I guess, from an auditor's perspective that revenues should be tested for understatement. And so if we're estimating our revenues conservatively, we've taken those factors into consideration that we don't want to necessarily understate them. And so I wouldn't be objective to adding some word or verbiage into that, just to clarify your point.
And I do think that would be absolutely necessary. Again, given the discussion we had around the ISDs at the last budget session. Just a second, please, Mary Catcher. I didn't realize I'd be the only one speaking. This is just for clarification again. We talk in, I think, section 411 someplace that utilities in and of themselves will be budgeted for a full cost recovery. Does that include capital cost?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, through the infrastructure reserve and the contribution to it, I would say yes, that would include that, or the provision for replacement of capital costs in the future.
And those reserves are part of the utilities budget, I think, are they not, Jeremy?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, okay, so we try as best we can to cover off capital costs when it comes to utilities at least. I'm good for now. I just going to give council a heads up that I think I'm going to when the motion is made, suggest a referral back to administration for consideration of more points that I will make during the debate phase of this, Mayor Catcher. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's nobody else in the speaking order, so I will go to a motion. Councillor Blizzard.
I'd like to make a motion that council adopt the revised operating and capital budgets policy FIN-024-C.
All right, thank you. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, I support this document and I think it looks good.
All right, thank you very much. It's open for discussion and debate. Councillor Harris.
Having worked with municipal budgets for a long time, I see this as an evolutionary improvement beyond what I expected. I think this document, while in some opinions maybe isn't perfect, I don't think we'll ever get everything into a policy, but I think it's a good place to start, and it does provide good fundamental direction from a prudent and fiscal policy planning standpoint. And I think it ultimately provides direction to our administration from council to ultimately prepare those operating and capital budgets that we have to review annually. So I'm fine with it. Will it ever be perfect? Probably never. But are we at the point where I think we can improve it? Yeah, I think so. And I will support it on that basis.
Okay, thank you. Second. Councillor Kelly, you're next.
Certainly. Some of the concerns I have, as we just discussed with administration, council really only reviews on an annual basis 2 to 3% of the annual spending. That's what our 4 days in budget looks at. We don't really spend any time whatsoever in the base budget, and I think we're missing. Excuse me. I do think too that it would make sense for council to exercise some discretion, and if it's not at budget time, that's fine. This policy can reflect the fact that during the year, council could look at some programs a couple or three chosen by council, and perhaps a couple or three chosen by administration for an in-depth look. It would shed some light on the operations. I think everybody would find it informative. And if nothing else, it could easily help remove some confusion and concern that certainly I've had over the last couple budget cycles with at least a couple of the programs. So I have that concern. I think that should be added to this policy, some wording to that effect. I think also under 4.1 somewhere, there's a reference to, let me find it here. It says here that under 4.11, there's a sentence, and I agree with this, by the way. It says, under limited circumstances, the approved operating budget may be amended by council to reflect approved council motions. And I get that. That needs to be limited and restricted. Special. Why? Because the budget is supposed to be a document that survives for a year. It makes some sense. I think what would also make some sense is as a corollary to that, we have with our council a notice of motion process that where a councillor wishes for something, that a motion to be considered, there's a process. We all know what that process is. And I would suggest that for significant capital additions, budget amendments that anticipate or foreshadow significant capital acquisitions, that a notice of motion process be relegated for those motions as well. I don't think the 4 days of budget is the proper time to spring significant motions. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but I am saying that it can certainly not do the motion nor the project justice, nor does that approach, in my mind, do council justice. It very often does not give council proper time for consideration and digestion, and it certainly, that process doesn't give administration the proper time to weigh in that our notice of motion process has. So again, I would be another change that I would like to suggest we would think about is limiting or restricting the types of council motions, particularly those that add significant or meaningful capital improvements, capital outlays, and in the budget document as presented, the number of $500,000 is mentioned, and I think that would be an appropriate cutoff. And then one other thing I'd like council to consider, under 416, we get into the discussion on the horizon list. And I happen to like the suggestion of a horizon list. I think it makes great sense. It might help clear up our capital budget as well. And there's also a reference in 416.3 about moving from the 5 to 10 year section to the 1 to 5 year section. I would think that when a capital project makes that graduation, that the section 4.16.1 would apply. In other words, major capital projects, when they move from year 6 or year 7 to years 1 to 5, the requirements of 4.16.1, the evaluation and the planning and the approval, that those sections requirements come into play forthwith. I understand Councillor Harris's opinion, and I respect that. I'm not suggesting that my changes will make this budget or this document perfect either. Jeremy, I stress, I think you guys did a great job. I really do. I think you cleaned up a lot, and it's good work. I look at these changes that I've talked about, and I see them as meaningful. I see them as being subject areas that have held up council or caused council some concern in the last couple of years. And I would like for administration to provide some alternatives within this policy to deal with the things that I've just mentioned. And Mayor Catcher, for that reason, or those reasons, I will move that this particular motion be referred back to administration to bring back to a future committee of the whole meeting with some comments addressing the points that I've just raised.
Okay, so we will go to the referral motion. So Ms. Exley will have to type that up. So it will be a motion that whatever the resolution is, be referred to a future committee of the whole meeting to address items presented.
Correct.
Something to that effect, Ms. Exley. We'll just give her a moment. So while she's typing that up, do you want to speak to your referral motion? Referral motions are debatable.
I will, and briefly, because I've in part already explained myself, Mayor Catcher. There's really three things that I think are meaningful to this council that have been issues for this council in the last couple cycles. And I think we could address as part of the policy. Would it make it perfect? Absolutely not, but it is part of the evolutionary process referred to by Councillor Harris. Again, and just to summarize them, I would like to see, and I think perhaps Mr. Fleming is correct, that the council would spend some time during the year, perhaps a committee of the whole meeting designated to some in-depth review of particular programs. That could be reflected in this particular policy. I would like to suggest, and I would suggest this rather strongly, that our notice of motion process be followed for all motions that contemplates capital budgets or promoting capital budgets in excess of $500,000. And thirdly, where's my list here? The movement of items on the 10-year capital plan from years 6 to 10 to years 1 to 5, wherever they fall within that scale, that particular movement would trigger the review and the information as defined within 4.16.1, the evaluation, the planning, and the approval. I think that's an appropriate time to spend that effort. Doesn't have to be done for outlying items, but if those items graduate to a shorter term, that is the exact time, I believe, when this should be done. So I'd encourage council to support this. It's a referral. I support 99% of the work in this. Again, I stress, I think it's a great job and great work. I'm addressing concerns that I've had over the last couple budget cycles that I think are meaningful, and I would like to suggest the council take a little bit more time and allow administration to weigh in on those concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the referral motion is open for discussion and debate. So I'll start it off, and I'm not going to support the referral motion. I think a lot of work has been done on this at this point in time. I think it is a really good job that they've done, and these documents take a long time to prepare. A lot of thought process has gone into them, and I also believe that we don't get surprised over the years. So I think the document is good, it's complete, and I think if council wants to have a wholesome conversation, we can have that. But I think it's time to get some work done, get this approved, and then we can have the conversation about what we want as a council of the whole, if there is anything else that we want. So for me, I won't be supporting the referral. Anybody else on debate? Not seeing any. Anything on close, Councillor Kelly?
No, I think I explained myself as well as I can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is only on the referral motion that you're voting right now. Please cast your vote. Motion is defeated, so we will go back to the main motion. Is there any further discussion and debate? If not, Councillor Blizzard, would you like to close on your motion?
I'm good.
Thank you. The motion is now closed. To adopt the revised operating and capital budgets policy FIN-024-C. Please cast your vote. That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Eamon. This time I would invite Mr. Morrissey back, and Ms. Duncan will be joining us virtually once again for the Downtown Development Grants Policy adoption. So welcome back.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, members of council. Once again, my name is Mark Morrissey. I'm the Director of Economic Development here at the City. Joining me virtually is Miss Erin Duncan, our Economic Development Officer, and I've been informed I owe her coffee, donuts, and lunch for forgetting to introduce her the last time around. So again, referring back to the Downtown Action Plan adopted in July, one of the recommendations was to establish development incentives to encourage development and redevelopment in the core. This was followed by a motion from Council to direct administration to provide a report providing options for tax and incentives for affordable housing and downtown redevelopment. However, in consultation with the city's legal services, residential development was determined to be largely not eligible for tax incentives under the Municipal Government Act. Bills 7 and 29, which were amended the MGA a couple of years ago, are specific to non-residential development only and therefore not applicable in this program or in this instance. The recommendation from the city's legal services were to implement both a brownfield tax incentive as well as development grants, and that would achieve the desired outcome. So earlier this evening, Council adopted the brownfield tax incentives, and we are now dealing with the downtown development grants. That is the second program recommended by the city's legal services. So looking at downtown development grants, it is intended to encourage multi-unit residential and mixed-use development in the downtown. It does complement brownfield tax exemptions. The MGA is largely silent when it comes to the city's ability to offer grant-based incentives. There really is only the restriction to align with the new West Partnership Trade Agreement, specifically Article 12 on business subsidies, which requires that any grant or subsidy offered by the municipality be generally available and not restrict applications to a single entity or project. The policy has been drafted with input from our legal team to ensure the compliance with the new West Partnership Trade Agreement as well as other legislation. So in terms of program area, all properties shown within the red box here on the map, which includes most of the areas in downtown that a multifamily or mixed-use project would fit in, are included. This does also include the old hospital site as well as the old Turner Lodge. And it would include those properties that are not otherwise eligible for brownfield tax exemptions. So again, the criteria and eligibility for downtown development grants would be very similar to what was approved or presented in the brownfield tax incentives. So properties must be new construction, must be a minimum of 2 stories, must be multi-unit residential to a minimum of 6 units, or mixed-use development to a minimum of 3, where the residential use is greater than 50% of the project area. And of course, they must obtain all development approvals. Applicants and projects must adhere to specific conditions. Again, these are similar to the brownfield tax incentives, so they must adhere to development regulations and requirements, must not be in arrears to the city on taxes, fees, utilities, etc., not be under a land use enforcement or stop order or in violation of a development agreement, permit, or safety code regulation, and must not be undergoing foreclosure, bankruptcy, or receivership. And this is not just at the time of application. This holds true for the entire duration of the program. So downtown development grants, these will be reimbursement based. They must enter into a program agreement, are payable only when the project is complete and we are satisfied that all the conditions have been met. And this is not just conditions of the development permit or agreement, but also conditions of the program agreement itself. and the project is approved for occupancy. The maximum value of the grant will not exceed 3% of eligible capital costs. So this is not a unique issue to Fort Saskatchewan. Multiple programs are offered in other municipalities, which are presented in Appendix D of the report. Administration looked at a per-door incentive similar to what is offered in other municipalities, including Red Deer, Lethbridge, and Grand Prairie, but felt this would lead to situations where developers would focus on building units or building the most units possible to maximize their incentive, whereas offering a percent of capital, this encourages developers to place a greater emphasis on the quality of the project and incorporate architectural features and designs, and as these would be considered eligible expenses. This approach we feel is more likely to result in development that aligns with the vision of downtown. Again, just looking at other municipalities here, again, City of Medicine Hat, Edmonton, and Calgary. So Calgary is an interesting one. They recently identified the first 3 projects that have qualified with their downtown development program, which offers $75 a square foot to convert unused and underutilized office space in the downtown to residential units. So they're actually providing grants to a total of $31 million to convert 414,000 square feet of office space into about 400 residential units in the downtown core. I will note that program uptake in other municipalities for similar programs have been low, with the exception of Calgary and Edmonton, where we've been told that uptake is meeting their expectations. As administration, we feel that offering these types of incentives while implementing the other activities within the Downtown Action Plan should increase interest in the downtown and should tip economics in favor of projects to the point where this program should see some uptake. And of course, we will be providing regular updates to Council on the uptake and of course outcomes of this program, similar to how we do with our small business grants, which would be run similar in nature. And then of course adjustments can be made as necessary. So what does the downtown development grant look like? Well, if we go back to the example used in the Brownfield tax incentives of a $14 million multi-unit building, 3% of capital there is $420,000 at the assessment value and mill rate, or current assessment value and mill rate with an annual tax levy of $77,000. We would anticipate that the amount provided would be recouped back in taxes in approximately 6 years. So that naturally leads to the question of where does that $420,000 in this case come from? It does have to come from somewhere. So other municipalities in this case, they have established incentive funds, which of course that is the drawback of a grant program. It does require a physical payment to be made. So other municipalities have established funds from which they can draw from. Establishing a fund such as this and putting a set limit on it also aligns with the New West Partnership Trade Agreement, as it demonstrates that the funds are generally available to a set limit, which is generally understood. And of course, other municipalities have done so. I should note that the City of Grand Prairie, I don't believe their in-fund was a lump sum payment. I think they built that up over a number of years. And it should be noted that these funds serve more than just downtown residential incentives. These are incentive funds which these municipalities actually draw a number of different incentive programs from, and these incentives are again provided in Appendix D of the report. So in determining a suitable value for the city itself, we looked at a number of different development scenarios with a low and high range. Of course, capital costs in the low case being a small lot, small development of around $2.5 million, with the high one again being that $14 million multi-unit that we've talked about in the past. Based on what we anticipate, administration believes an incentive fund of $500,000 would be sufficient to support downtown development grants. And we are also recommending that this process be structured similar to a tax increment financing or TIF program, where the tax uplift on new projects would replenish the fund until it reaches its optimal balance. And then again, that balance then becomes available for future projects. In consultation with other municipal departments, it's anticipated that this should not have directing the tax uplift to the reserve fund instead of general revenues should not have an impact on service levels, because downtown is a mature neighborhood with existing service levels as it exists today. Administration is recommending that the Economic Development Reserve be a suitable funding source. It would require some minor amendments, which are presented in the report, to be repurposed as a funding source for a downtown development grant. So we are recommending minor amendments to Financial Reserves Policy, specifically Schedule A, as it relates to the Economic Development Reserve. Contributions to the reserve as a result of the tax uplift would be noted in the city's annual budget, and it's there that we would redirect them back to the reserve until the optimal balance is achieved. And again, we are recommending that $500,000 from the Financial Stabilization Reserve be allocated to the Economic Development Reserve to establish the funding source. The uncommitted balance of the Economic Development Reserve as of today is $276,900. The Financial Stabilization Reserve balance is $15.296 million, which is approximately $1.13 million over the optimal balance. So with that, I will make note of the recommended motions. If council so desires, that they can adopt Downtown Development Grant Policy FIN-015-C, and that the amendments to the reserve policy be made, and then the seed funding be placed in that reserve. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions council may have.
All right. Thank you very much for the presentation. So we will deal with questions first. So I'll ask a question first. So the map that you have blankets everything, including it includes everything. So I guess the question that I have is, you've got the historic precinct worked in there. You've got further east, almost to where the lodge is. Why would we include those areas in those?
Your Worship, through to your Worship, the map itself largely follows the same one within the municipal development plan, identifying the various sections of the downtown core. These areas present the most likely locations for mixed use and multifamily residential. Of course, we do have extended the boundaries to include the old hospital lands and the former Turner Lodge site, because these do present potential development for mixed use and multifamily.
Okay, and then the next question that I have, don't lose the map. Based on the previous bylaw that we approved for the Brownfield, would those not be excluded out of there based on what we approved through that bylaw? Because we said we didn't want them to double dip on these things, so wouldn't they have just automatically been excluded?
Through to your Worship, we did consider that. However, we chose instead to put language in the policy and the bylaw to prevent double dipping. We felt in this case we shouldn't restrict projects from choosing one incentive or the other. Some developers may prefer the cash, whereas others would, because it is more of an upfront to offset capital, whereas others, and again, I say upfront meaning once the project's complete versus extending it out over the number of years following. Some would prefer that to offset their capital costs versus offsetting their taxes over a period of time. So rather than pigeonholing them into one incentive or the other, we would just include language to let them pick the program that works best for them, and then that would instantly restrict them from accessing the other program.
Okay, so I'm going to indulge myself with the third question because everybody has been tonight. So based on that, though, wouldn't we be the ones to actually make the decision? Because when you say you only have $500,000 in there, so if you go to Fort Station, they could do a $14 million project like that and utilize all your funds, and then there's nothing left for anybody else. So why wouldn't we be the ones to figure out what works the best based on the programs?
Through to your Worship, it really depends on what's better for the developer. We're not in a position to say what works for them. That would be them. If Fort Station were to come in with a significant project that would eat up or would consume a number or most of the amount, options could be to come back to ask for more, or we could just look at saying, okay, this fund has been tapped out. It does, at $14 million, it does leave us a little bit left over for some smaller projects as well. If we get a large $14 million project and a small one in the downtown, I would call that a success, and I'd be happy to reap the benefits from that, and then again rebuild that fund to look at the next projects in line.
Okay, Councillor Blizzard, you're next.
Thanks for the presentation. I do have a few issues with this overall, and I guess this is an example of careful what you wish for.
Okay, we're in questions.
Yep, I will have some.
I know.
Well, maybe I'll hold the questions. Okay, so let's go to the questions. 500,000. How long is this going to last? I guess you don't know that answer, but if we get a few businesses, do you have an idea, have a plan, what you're thinking? Is this ongoing?
Your Worship, to the Council Blizzard, it's difficult to predict. It will depend on the number of projects that proceed and which ones go forth first. The policy does state these are provided on a first-come, first-served basis until the funds are utilized, at which point applications would not be accepted anymore.
Okay, and have you already heard of any interest even before this is now done?
Your Worship, to the Council Blizzard, yes, we anticipate some interest. The motion from Council in August of last year was the result of a presentation from a potential development in the downtown.
Oh, okay. Speaking to the other side of that, though, what if 500,000 and 2 years later nothing has happened? How would we go forward? Just leave it and hope for the best? Is there a end date that we're like, if nothing's happened in so much time, we stop this?
Through Your Worship, through the Council Blizzard, we would treat this similar to what we just talked about with the Brownfield tax incentives, and that's provide Council with an annual update. Part of that process is to talk and meet with potential development downtown, so property owners, people who have projects, to get a sense of what works for them and what doesn't. And some of that input has gone into this process, but then of course, over the next year, we'll talk to them to say, does this work for you? Why or why not? And that will be information that we do provide back to Council in terms of a recommendation. Do we keep this going? Do we amend it? And if we do amend, here's why, and here's what we recommend based on the information that we received. Or do we just close the program down? So those would be the options that we would bring forward to Council at the appropriate time as the reviews are being done.
Okay, that's it for now.
Thank you. Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, thank you. So a question just so I can gauge the risk or liability associated with a grant that's been awarded, and then so if say a property owner developer comes in arrears, so what kind of protection, I guess, do we have, and what measures do you envision taking place if something goes sideways with the project?
Your Worship, to the Councillor Nguyen, there are a number of safeguards that we have built into the policy itself, including all of that all of that due diligence will be done prior to a payment being issued. So the project has to be complete. We would check to make sure that the applicant is not in arrears to the city. The property itself is not in arrears to the city. It's not in bankruptcy. All of this would be done prior to payment actually being issued to the applicant. So we're sure that the project is complete. There is also a requirement to reimburse the city if at some point we determine that something underhanded was done, or they are no longer are adhering to the program agreement. It may be difficult to recoup the funds at that point, but there is language in the policy that allows us to do that. There's also the expectation that if we determine that an applicant is falsified documents or provided us incorrect information, they can actually be prohibited from applying for this program for a significant number of years.
Okay, so but once funding is given, really, there's if tax is due a month from that point, there's really no going back on that funding for the grant. Because the reason I asked is because I thought you alluded to the fact that it could be an ongoing grant payment, but I don't think that's the case. Right, it's just one-time payment, and then so there would be a difficult recourse process if something like that were to happen.
Your Worship, to the Councillor Nguyen, that is correct. It is a one-time payment upon completion of the project. I'd like to believe that we could recoup funds, but realistically speaking, if payment is issued and then it's determined that they no longer are aligning with the program agreement, we have legal options available to us. None of them are great, but that's the risk that we have to take in this case.
Okay, and then a second question that I have, actually come back to me. I want to think about how I want to word it.
Okay, just let me write you down here. You don't have to buzz back in. Councillor Kelly?
Thank you. Mark, maybe I missed it. Is there anything in the policy itself that directs administration to bring this back for council review and administration comment on an annual basis?
Your Worship, to the Councillor Kelly, I don't believe there's anything written in there. However, it would be administration's intention to do that, similar to how we do with our other grant programs on the small business side.
Well, the Brownfield one, it's actually written into the policy. Why wouldn't we write it into this policy?
Your Worship, to Councillor Kelly, to be honest, probably an oversight. If that's something council wishes to add, I don't see an issue with it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Macon?
Just to follow up on Councillor Kelly's comment, do we have a grant policy, a general grant policy that stipulates annual review of grant? That would cover that without having to make an amendment?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Macon, I don't believe so.
Okay.
But Mr. Fleming or Ms. Duguid-Smith could correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think they do. No, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll go back to Councillor Noyan. Sorry, I turned yours off, Mark.
Wait, thank you. Oh, mine's on now.
Yeah, yours is on. I turned Mark off by mistake.
This is a question that probably could be applied to Brownfield tax exemption as well. But you know, if I was a developer and I wanted to come into the downtown and begin developing, and I'm really attracted by these incentives, the granting, like I would want to have some certainty that I will be funded or my taxes will be waived before I potentially purchase and go through the design process for the construction and go through the entire development permit, right? So just listening to
question.
Oh yes, right. It's sort of that, you know, just listening to how maybe the uncertainties with the program and how funds are going to be allocated and potentially all used up by a larger developer. Like I guess how open is your department to like informal discussions prior to a developer making a commitment of purchase of lands? Like, can you just maybe speak to that a bit?
Sure. Your Worship, to Councillor Noyan, that type of process in terms of discussions prior to application, we strongly encourage. We do the same process with the smaller business grants that we offer, where we encourage applicants to talk to us, at which point we get a sense of how serious the project is, how likely they are to move forward. And at that point, we don't earmark funds, but we do take a bit of a mental math and note what if this project were to proceed, what's left. Applications as they come in, of course, then would be formally earmarked for funding. So then we have an updated uncommitted balance, which we are able to share with the next applicant through the door. In terms of commitments and guarantees, once the application is made and a program agreement signed, then that's the guarantee to that developer that if they complete the project and adhere to the conditions in that agreement, then they will get the funds at the end of the day. And that, again, these are now committed funds within that balance. So it's not, we won't get into a situation where, oh, we promised you 120,000, but there's only 100 left in the pot, because we will be continually updating that committed and uncommitted balance within there to make sure that we're only approving amounts that we have left.
Yeah, that's good to know how it works. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. It looks like all the questions. Somebody like to put a motion on? Okay, go ahead. There's 3 of them. Oh.
Do you want to?
Whoops, sorry. Oops, push your button again. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'll make a motion that council adopt the Downtown Development Grant Policy FIN 015-C.
Thank you. Would you like to speak in favor of the motion?
I don't think anything further right now.
Okay, thank you. It's open for discussion and debate. Councillor Macon.
Thank you. I will support this motion. I really think the policy was really well written. We are only granting money if the project is completed. If the project is completed, we have tax money coming in, which in turn replenishes that pot. So I am confident in the way that this is set up to limit any liability that the city has. So on this money, so I am very much in support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blizzard on discussion and debate.
I will support this too, but I do have some reservations. 30 years ago when I moved here, downtown was quite busy. There was a lot of things downtown, and then 10 years after that, approximately, highway development was encouraged and started getting more and more. And all of a sudden, we put lots of money in over the last 20 years trying to bring people back into downtown. So I think it's a case of careful what you wish for. Sometimes it's not all that it seems, but hopefully this will help a little bit. So I will support it.
Okay, thank you. I will support the motion as well. This is, and just clarify one more time, Mr. Morrissey, this is for residential development.
Through to your worship, that is correct.
Right.
Only multi-unit and mixed use where 50% or more is for residential are eligible.
Okay, thank you. And that's why I will support this, because we keep talking, we want to do infill downtown. We want to encourage developers to come down. And if we lose some of our businesses down there, there's an empty lot, maybe there's an opportunity to build a two-story and have residential. I mean, there's nothing wrong with even having like a small apartment or something on one of the corner ones in between, because this is about getting more density downtown, which is going to create more of a buzz. And, if we can't get more businesses, which we're ultimately hoping for with the other grant, then we really need to work to try and get some of this infill done. And I agree, when I looked at it at first, I kind of went, but you're telling me it's $500,000 is what we're maxing it out to, and we do expect to have return on investment if this actually goes forward. So on that basis, I would support this. Councillor Kelly?
Thank you. Mark, another question, if you don't mind. It's my recollection that the land use bylaw requires, I believe, 101st Street, 100 Avenue, and 103rd Street for new development in those locales to be mixed use, multi-story. Am I correct?
Your worship, to the Councillor Kelly, I would defer that to planning and development. I don't know if Ms. Duguid-Smith could provide some insight.
Through your worship, yes, I believe that is correct.
And so any development that could happen on the vacant lots on those three streets would have to be mixed use.
Through your worship, the ground floor has to be commercial or office space. Above, it could be commercial or office as well.
How many of those buildings has the city seen built in our downtown core in the last 25 years?
Through your worship, to the Councillor Kelly, I would have to defer to Mr. Fleming or Ms. Duguid-Smith. I'm not aware of any.
Through your worship, I'm just racking my brain, but not a lot are coming to mind.
Okay, well, I would agree. I've been here longer than I think all of you probably added up and doubled, and there's none. I'm not convinced that 3% is going to tip that economic scale. I hope it does, but I don't think it will. Did you give any consideration as part of this deliberation to changing that particular requirement and allowing perhaps, as Mayor Katcher discussed in her comments, allowing just simply residential and or allowing simply single store commercial so that at least we wouldn't have vacant lots in our downtown core?
Your worship, to the Councillor Kelly, in terms of just single store commercial, no, it was not considered because that was not the intent of the motion provided from council back in August. We, as part of the downtown action plan, we are looking at the land use bylaw and the implications it has for redevelopment downtown. I can't sit here and say that we're going to all of a sudden remove the requirement for mixed use, but it is something that we are in active conversation with planning with to look at the land use bylaw and the role it has in redevelopment downtown.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I'll certainly support your proposal. Like with the Brownfield, though, I think we will subsidize those that are on the cusp right now, and that's great. They will move from being on, those projects will move from being on the cusp to being in progress, which is an improvement in our core for sure. I don't think we're going to initiate meaningful change, unfortunately, but let's wait and see what happens. I truly look forward to an updated report from administration in a year's time on the success of this particular program. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Noyen on close.
Yeah, thanks for coming forward again today, Mark, and doing your best along with your coworker Aaron to get something going in the downtown. I think it could be the incentive that we're looking for, that we need, and this along with Brownfield tax incentives should get something stirring the pot here, and look forward to seeing what happens in the near future. I don't think it's a huge risk to our city, whichever way it goes, and if there is room for improvement on it, that can certainly be addressed at a future date. But yeah. Congratulations on bringing this forward, and I'll hope to see some progress.
Okay, thank you. So the motion is now closed to adopt Downtown Development Grant Policy FIN-015C. Please cast your vote. That is carried unanimously. Which one would like to do the next motion? Councillor Abatoye, do you want to do the next one? No? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Noyen.
All right, I move that Council amend the Financial Reserves Policy FIN 021-C, as presented in Appendix C, as attached to the Council report dated May 24, 2022, to establish a funding source for the Downtown Development Grant Program.
Thank you. Would you like to speak in favor of your motion?
Yeah, it's essential with the policy as proposed.
Okay, thank you. It's open for discussion and debate. Not seeing anything on close?
Nothing on close.
Thank you. The motion is now closed. Please cast your vote.
I voted.
Ms. Exley? Oh, there it is. Carried unanimously. Thank you. Do you want to round this one out?
But I move that Council direct administration to allocate $500,000 from the Financial Stabilization Reserve to the Economic Development Reserve.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah, it's a number proposed that is reasonable to the department implementing this policy, and therefore I think we should go ahead with that.
Okay, thank you. It's open for discussion and debate. And I guess I just want to clarify, I think Mr. Eamon left, but to administration. So this money will be moved across and then it will be tracked separately. So, and we will get the reporting on that on an annual basis. Okay.
Through your worship, yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Noyen, anything on close?
Close.
All right, the motion is now closed. Please cast your vote. That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item we have is notice of motions. Councillor Abatoye, can you push your button, please? Oh, thank you, Mr. Morrissey. Sorry, I'm so excited to move along the agenda. Go ahead, Councillor Abatoye. You can read in your notice of motion.
I'm hoping that it will be displayed. Okay. So I make a motion that council approves the following City of Fort Saskatchewan resolution submission to the 2022 Alberta Municipalities Convention. Do I have to read it all?
Ms. Exley, would you prefer to read it all?
I can just read the first part and then leave the whereas.
Your worship, yes, we would need it because it's considered a notice of motion, so we need to read it into the record.
Everything. Okay. It is therefore resolved that the Alberta Municipalities Association requests that the Government of Alberta continues to engage municipalities and housing management bodies regarding the standardized templates for an affordable housing needs assessment to ensure data collected and used in the templates meaningfully captures each municipality's unique local context for housing needs, challenges, and barriers that inform municipally identified priorities. Whereas the Government of Alberta is developing a standardized template for an affordable housing needs assessment as a key action item outlined in Stronger Foundations, Alberta 10-year capital strategy to improve and expand affordable housing. Whereas the needs assessment is intended to offer a standardized and comprehensive approach for evidence-based decision-making and is intended to support municipalities to identify and prioritize their housing needs in their respective communities. Whereas each Alberta municipality has a unique household, geographic, and demographic context that informs their corresponding housing needs. Whereas federal census profile data is a valuable resource in identifying the overall housing need, additional local context is necessary to effectively maximize the efficiency, efficacy, and sustainability of affordable housing investments. Whereas data stories help make complex data clear and understandable through visuals and narrative and can provide municipalities opportunities to contextualize municipally identified priorities.
Okay, so this is being put in as a notice of motion. Technically, there would have to be a date on there, technically.
That's correct.
So, Ms. Exley, I would think that we would have to have a date on there, which would technically be the next council meeting. But I do understand she's going to ask for waivers, but for the proper motion, it should have a date.
That is correct, Your Worship.
Okay. So,
so at the June 14th regular council meeting, we can include that in there.
Okay. Yeah. We think you should read the whole thing again.
Oh.
All right. So that is a notice of motion. We don't, we're just accepting it as a notice of motion. I understand you indicated that you would like to have provisions waived. So if that's the case, I will need a motion to waive provisions of the procedural bylaw. And this is non-debatable and will require 2/3 majorities. So did you want to make that motion?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay, so Ms. Exley, if you could put that motion up. And so this is non-debatable. So I'm going to close it. Please cast your vote. And it does need 5 in order to pass. And if it passes, then we will go in and deal with the motion at hand. Please cast your vote. That is carried 7-0. So now we can go back to the motion, and so we'll take that motion. We'll move it forward, and you can speak in favor of your motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the need for affordable housing is well recognized and should be a priority as our community continues to grow. Housing is considered to be affordable when households spend 30% of its income on adequate shelter. As at the 2016 Statistics Canada census, 34.4% of households in our communities spends 30% or more of their income on shelter costs. Now, this is not just a Fort Saskatchewan problem, but it's a province-wide issue, and that is why the provincial government has a 10-year strategy to improve and expand affordable housing called Stronger Foundations. The Stronger Foundations Affordable Housing Strategy was released by the Government of Alberta on November 1st, with consideration to increase the number of affordable housing units by 25,000 in 10 years, as well as additional rent subsidy supports. The Government of Alberta also went ahead to commit $118 million in capital funding and $25.3 million in operating funding over 3 years. What has happened is that the Ministry of Seniors and Housing has invited municipalities and housing providers from across the province to discuss the development of a standardized templates for affordable housing needs assessment. And the assessments will offer, will enable us be able to make evidence-based decision making, and is intended to support municipalities to identify and prioritize their housing needs in their respective communities. As one of the council members sitting on the Highland Housing Foundation, I actually have consulted with the executive director of Highland Housing Foundation, and as well as some board members. And the organization is fully in support of the resolution. As you may be aware, the Highland Housing Foundation currently manages 11 affordable housing sites and actively advocates for expanded access to affordable housing in the region. So my hope is that as the work progresses by the government on these affordable housing needs assessments, I think it's important for us as a city to take an advocacy position in support of more affordable housing in our community. And I think one of the approaches will be to ensure that, or advocate to Alberta municipalities to advocate to the Seniors Housing Ministry to ensure that the data collected, meaningfully captures our municipality and, just generally speaking, because it's not just Fort Saskatchewan, each municipality's unique local context for housing needs. So what we've seen in time past is the use of quantitative data, which favors only large municipalities, therefore causing smaller municipalities like ours to miss out on the much needed affordable housing funding. And if you had seen the federal budgets, this past budgets, the federal government has allocated a lot of funding towards housing. And those funds are usually funneled through the provincial government to municipalities. And so if this housing needs assessments could help us get, more affordable housing into our communities. And so because of this reason, I think that it is necessary for us to put forward this resolution to Alberta municipalities at their conference in September. And maybe this will be an advocacy position for them in the next 2 years. And maybe we can expect to see more affordable housing options in our community. I do believe that affordable housing is a human right. As a matter of fact, the United Nations said that adequate housing is a fundamental human right. So I think that it's important that all levels of government need to step up, to provide the much needed affordable housing, because before it becomes a crisis. And current research on affordable housing need is critical, and I hope to see commensurate action as the real needs are being exposed or understood through this affordable housing needs assessment. And that's the end of my very long speech. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it's open for discussion and debate. Councillor Harris.
Councillor Batoye kind of flipped this to me over the weekend and asked me what I thought. And I'm fine with the intent. I have a couple of questions, though. First of all, is this our resolution? And if so, who wrote it? And is it going to be put forward in similar manner by other municipalities as well?
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So it is our resolution. It's going to be from the city of Fort Saskatchewan. It is going to be seconded by Strathcona County. And that's going to be coming to the council meeting on June the 14th. They have expressed interest in supporting it. And so I hope I answered your question. It is our resolution, yes.
Yeah, and I have no problem with it. The only from having written resolutions that have gone to the AUMA before, normally the whereases are written first, and they set the stage against which the now therefore is the operational part. So that should be the last thing, not the first thing.
No.
Unless the AUMA has changed their process, normally resolutions before the AUMA have whereas, and then they have a description, whereas, they have a description, and after all of that background is set, the final portion of the resolution is now therefore. That's the active portion of the resolution that will be voted on. The whereas is just set the stage. So this is a question for administration, just to make sure that what we're going to be putting forward is correct and actually adheres to AUMA process. Now, if they've changed it since my days of writing these things for municipalities, which was many years ago, of course, I was always under the impression the whereases are first, and now therefore is the active part of the resolution. That's what gets voted on, and that should be the last part of the motion. Is that not correct, administration?
Ms. Cowie?
Through your worship to Councillor Harris, we will for sure make sure if it's passed this evening that it'll be appropriately placed in the template for Alberta municipalities.
And that's all I'm suggesting. I mean, this is good stuff. I don't disagree with that, but I want to make sure that it's in the right format to be submitted in accordance with AUMA guidelines and requirements. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I just want to make a comment. So typically, you know, unless it's something that's really, really urgent, I don't like doing, you know, dealing with the notice of motions this way. But unfortunately, or I don't know when this transpired, but because of the deadline, it now became critical to make their deadline if we wanted to submit this. But you know, I think it's just a reminder to us if somebody is thinking about doing a motion for AUMA or even FCM, it's really, really important to think about the timing so that people can actually take the documents away and really digest them. You know, council's very busy people, and it really takes a lot to stop and really think about this. And yes, we ultimately will get to vote when it comes to AUMA, but I fully understand that, you know, it is short notice on this one. So, but I am just mentioning it to say, you know what, let's really think about that. I think it's great that we're doing a resolution. I don't think we do enough into them, but you know, just the timing, if we can really be conscious of that, but I will support it. Okay, so Councillor Abatoya on close.
Just want to say thank you to Councillor Harris, because actually, now that I think about it, he might actually be correct. But like Ms. Cowie has, I said might. So, but like Ms. Cowie has said, we'll ensure that it's done correctly before it's sent out to AUMA. But thank you all for your support.
Okay, the motion is now closed. Please cast your vote. That is carried unanimously. So Councillor Harris is correct. He just looked up the format. So never underestimate anybody with 100 years of knowledge. So are there any other notice of motions?
250 years, thank you.
Not seeing any. Any points of interest? Going, gone. Any councillor inquiries? Not seeing any. Thank you, everybody. Mr. Fleming advises we have nothing for in camera this evening. We are good. So we are being released. We are officially adjourned at 6:43 p.m. Thank you. Have a good evening. Take care, Councillor Kelly. Hope to see you back soon.
Sorry.